The game Etherworld was released 10 years ago as a dating simulator aimed at a female audience, but in the end, the number of men was higher. The game allowed players to play different characters from simple and effective to very difficult and ineffective characters. Among them was one useless character popular for his level of difficulty and horrible facial features. And there was a pervert who played this character for 10 years. His name is Baek Yusol. One day, a message appeared on the game's forum, and Baek Yusol thought maybe a new update was coming. The final boss in a dating simulator was surprising to the guy. It doesn't make sense in a monster that erases magic, and many players lost their characters. A dark demonic dragon appeared, which is the 13th month of the Black Night. In the game, there is a cult organization called Dark Demon People. Their goal is to help the second world, called Personality Gate, to take over this world. And when they finally succeeded in achieving this goal, a dark demonic dragon appeared. 90% of this continent is captured by the forces of the Baek cult. Yusol was not interested in the plot, only in battles, so it was worth trying to destroy this monster. Baek Yusol decided to demonstrate his skills that he had been honing over the past 10 years. The character of Baek Yusol is the only character in the game who cannot use magic, even though everyone can use magic in the game. Even experienced players prefer not to play with it than a regular player. Of course he can use magic, but only one called Shimmer. The flicker spell allows you to move very quickly from 3 to 10 meters at random. The direction in which it will flicker is random, so if you do not control the distance well, it will end your life due to the speed of the impact. But the recharge time and mana consumption are very low, and there is even a penalty if you do not move for 2 seconds after using the skill. The player has reached the level of Master of the Flicker spell. He can control which direction he moves and the distance, and the penalty has also been cancelled. Unlike other spells, Flicker was nothing more than a way to move, but Baek Yusol became obsessed with this character. For the past 5 years, he has been playing only one character in a game that cannot use magic, and it all depended on the player's skill level. Having easily defeated the dragon, Baek Yusol was even surprised that he defeated it with a useless character and decided to share this with other players on the forum. The guy had no sooner entered the forum than the screen informed him with a red light that the wrong ending had been reached and that 90% of the world had been destroyed. The screen asked Baek Yusol to reach the correct ending, and the guy disappeared, leaving his workplace empty. He woke up in a cold hut not knowing where he was, and all he could do was look around. Looking around the ruined house, he noticed an old broken mirror. When he looked in the mirror, he realized that he had become his game character. His amazement was interrupted by a screen that informed him that he needed to escape from his pursuers. Realizing that this task was in the prologue of Baek Yusol, he reached into his pocket and found the entrance certificate of the Stella Academy. It was hard to believe, but it was the world of the game and the player had to become Baek Yusol. That voice was saying that you need to reach the true ending, even though there are only a few endings in the game, and why no one has reached the true ending in 10 years. But this is not the time to think about it, because as far as the player remembered, right after Baek Yusol wakes up, the pursuers will break into the house. There was already a group of people outside who were supposed to pursue the hero. When the main pursuer noticed the cabin, he shouted and ordered to search it. Baek Yusol wondered what to do next, since he could neither run away nor defeat them, so the screen told him that he could use Flicker. With his body suffering from mana leakage syndrome and unable to hold it in, he has only one hope, the spell he has practiced all his life. The pursuers were already very close, so there was no time to think about it and no need to use Flicker. Baek Yusol ran out of the hut and came into sight of his pursuers. They were equipped with magic boots, so obviously the only way to escape was to use the Shimmer. The main drawback of Flicker is that if you do not control the distance, you can collide with an object and end your life. The pursuer swung his sword at Baek Yusol, but he had already managed to use Flicker and move away from the blow. The group of mercenaries were surprised that their opponent was a mage, but the leader reassured the group, saying the user of the Flicker becomes paralyzed for 2 seconds. But Baek Yusol was not paralyzed and continued to flee from the pursuit. He should use uneven terrain, because players who do not learn to jerk at this stage will not reach the next episode. In fact, 99 of the Baek Yusolim players failed to pass the training, and those who did were unable to control distance and continuity. He successfully jumped over to the other side of the ditch and continued to run as fast as he could. The pursuers realize that the Flicker user is difficult to catch, so they decide to destroy him with magic from a distance. The second part of the training is to learn how to dodge magic arrows using flickering. With the help of the skills of the Sixth Sense Magic Leakage Syndrome and Cognitive Acceleration, time seemed to slow down around Baek Yusol, so he was able to use the flicker in time and dodge the magic arrows. Looking back, he saw the crater from the magic blow and ran on. And then, he had to learn how to cross the canyon with the help of Flicker. The only way to cross the canyon is to cancel the flicker, which occurs in 1/10 of a second at the perfect time, otherwise you can say goodbye to life. Then he will be able to meet with the passing mages and escape, and that will be the end of the training. Over the canyon of 20 flying boulders, it was possible to do so, but the pursuers were closer than he had expected. The distance between him and the mercenaries is 100 meters, and the flicker lasts 3 seconds. The only way to pass the test is to destroy the pursuers, because the rules do not prohibit it. The idea of destroying someone doesn't bother the hero, and it's not even that the plot has them as enemies of his parents, but that he feels he can win. When the enemies saw the boy, they immediately rushed to attack him because he was alone and would be easy to defeat. Baek Yu-sol used Flicker and quickly destroyed the enemy without even feeling guilty. After all, he needed to survive. While the enemies were recovering, the guy started to run away and think about what to do next, because he had defeated only one. But the pursuers were faster than him and were already standing in front of him, preparing their next attack. It was another magical attack, but this time with balls of fire that instantly approached Baek Yu-sol. He managed to use this flicker and was able to dodge an attack that was supposed to reduce him to ashes. The attackers were already happy that they had destroyed their target and were about to investigate the site of the attack. Seizing the moment, Baek Yu-sol quietly counterattacked the pursuers. A feature of Flicker is the preservation of momentum before and after use, so the guy quickly defeats another opponent. There are 2 more to go, and they need to be finished before the other 2 catch up. The pursuers were shocked that the magician had such a high reaction rate. The guy could not dodge their attacks forever, especially at close range, so he decided to end it as soon as possible. The enemy has already realized that Baek Yu-sol only uses a dagger and flicker, so he should protect his face and neck. The pursuer, already prepared to attack the hero, did not expect that Baek Yu-sol would attack his comrade and destroy him. He was surprised that the guy used to run away like a rat who never fought, but now he does. Baek Yu-sol interrupted him and said that it was earlier and thanked him for helping him to become better. The fight for survival began and the threatening enemy took a fighting stance, knowing Baek Yu-sol's fighting style. The guy threw a spear at the enemy who thought that by throwing the spear the hero would hit him in the side. Having successfully deflected the spear, he looked to the side, but Baek Yu-sol was not there. The guy was planning to attack from the front from the very beginning, so Baek Yu-sol easily destroyed the pursuer. Baek Yu-sol sat down, exhausted both physically and morally, because he had to destroy a man in order to survive. This is definitely not a dream. The first flicker, the first battle, and the first destruction are time to leave this place. Although this is a bitter aftertaste of the battle, he has to think realistically. He has no money, so by cheating mercenaries, he found 2 million credits. The problem is that he has to cross this cliff. On the other side of the canyon, he noticed a group of mages who asked if he could cross the abyss on a bridge, and the boy asked them to wait. The wizards stayed waiting and said that he had to be at least a third-class knight to be able to get over the cliff. Without waiting, Baek Yu-sol used the flicker and had already jumped over several boulders. They were surprised because they had never seen such magic and wondered if it was a kind of magic that was not a prank. The blue-haired wizard interrupted their discussion by saying that it was a shimmer spell. While the wizards were arguing that the flicker could not be controlled in direction and distance, the last pursuers had already appeared on the other side. Without waiting, one of the enemies casts a spell in the direction of Baek Yu-sol. Not expecting the attack, the guy noticed it too late but managed to dodge it. Recharge time flicker 3 seconds dodge. All magic is impossible, you need to find the next boulder. But the mercenary did not think to wait long and attacked the hero as quickly as possible. Baek Yu-sol dodged the attack, but the rock he was standing on was damaged and he began to fall into the abyss. All the boulders were far away from him, but Baek Yu-sol hoped he would land on at least one and used the flicker. He managed to grab onto a rock, but another attack was already flying at him. And when he thought that he was going to say goodbye to his life, someone counterattacked the spell and it saved the guy. It was an ice spear covered with lightning. Moreover, someone used 2 attributes. The wizard accurately calculated the trajectory without spending mana. Looking down, Baek Yu-sol saw that it was a blue-haired sorceress. Frightened by the spells of this level, the pursuers finally quickly left the boy and disappeared in an unknown direction. After descending from the boulders and crossing the Baek Yu-sol gap, he finally met his rescuers and was safe. He wanted to thank his rescuer, but she turned away and said that she did not do it to be thanked, so she advised him to ignore it. The girl had the most beautiful voice that Baek Yu-sol had ever heard, but it was hard to communicate with her. In any case, the people who were chasing him are known as bandits who rob villages, but most of this activity is carried out by a cult of dark demons. This is where it all ends. As soon as Baek Yu-sol escapes from the cliff, he will enter the territory of the mages and the dark demons will not be able to pursue him. The beginning of the 2nd episode of Stella's Academy. It will be a difficult period for the hero to relive his school days. After a while, it was already dark and the cart was traveling in the direction of the territory of the magicians. In a warm wheelchair, Baek Yusol slept and dreamed of memories from his childhood. Little Baek Yusol dreamed of becoming a magician and told his mother about it with enthusiasm. His mother supported the boy, so she and his father went to great lengths to buy him an old magic volume. He read and studied this book every day and studied hard so as not to disappoint his parents. He would read until late at night and fall asleep on the book, at which point his mother would cover him with a blanket while he slept sweetly. But one day, the doctor confirmed the diagnosis that Baek Yusol had mana leakage syndrome, which scared his mother. The boy himself could not believe these words and immediately burst into tears, and the player did not understand whether these were the character's memories or his. Baek Yusol woke up in the morning, and the mage who wanted to wake him up was sitting across from him, warning him that they would soon arrive in Lezoicha. The group decided to stop for breakfast to rest and continue on. The blue-haired sorceress stared at Baek Yusol, which put Baek Yusol in a stupor. But the beauty noticed the guy's gaze and immediately turned away, and he just smiled. Time in this world was closer to modernity than to the Middle Ages. Magic exists in the ethereal world. But in safe cities, there are flying ships and trains. Right now, the group is heading to Lezoic to board a flying ship that will go to Arcanium, where the real episode will begin. Arcanium has famous magic towers, knightly orders of magicians, and 5 academies, the most powerful of which is the Stella Academy. This academy is full of geniuses and nobles from all over the world, and the player still didn't understand how Baek Yusol managed to get there. The guy decided to test his skills, and thanks to his sixth sense and accelerated detection, he was able to survive. A cursed body that prevented him from accumulating mana, a kind of congenital curse that Baek Yusol has. But it allowed him to find the mana around him with his sixth sense and feel the attacks coming even if he didn't look in their direction. Acceleration of detection allowed him to perceive everything as if time had slowed down if the attack was approaching him at a speed that a person could not detect. This is a necessary skill for Baek Yusol since he cannot use mana, but he can't use his sixth sense for long either. The original Baek Yusol had very low sensitivity, but the player took away some of the character's characteristics. In the world, skills are represented as levels and characteristics as stars, with the maximum level of 9 stars being almost impossible to achieve. The hero decided to invest in sensitivity to develop a sixth sense and quickness of reaction, because endurance can be built in other ways. The way to strengthen the mana leakage syndrome is in the academy, which means that the hero has no other choice if he wants to stop the end of the world and get cured. The wizards hurried Baek Yusol's boyfriend, for it was time to leave. The blue-haired sorceress gave him a thoughtful look and also got ready to go. Upon arrival in Lezoichu, Baek Yusol boarded a flying ship and continued his journey to Arcanum on it. The nobles mockingly gossiped about the boy because he looked around as if he had never been on a flying ship. They believed that the academy was contaminating itself with ordinary peasants and said this directly to Baek Yusol's face. The guy just sighed at them, which made the rich people very angry and indignant at him. But at that time, everyone started to make noise because the princess of the kingdom of Adolabit, Han Bion Adolabit, appeared. A nobleman who was molesting Baek Yusol decided to address her, but she just gave him an angry look and walked on. The player mentioned that she is the thief of the game world, and there are always arguments between her and the main character, and at the end, she goes to the other side. In some endings, it will be destroyed. In some, the entire academy mocks it, as if the developers had a personal grudge against it. She's really popular with the male players, she's really pretty, but Baek Yusol feels like she'll destroy him if he talks to her. He was hungry and decided to go to the cafeteria, but when he looked at the prices, he decided to eat at the Arcanium. An announcement was made to everyone that in 10 minutes they would arrive at the Arcanium, so they needed to go down to the first floor. Finally, the player accepted the fact that this is his reality now, and it's time to start. Standing by the window, Baek Yusol wondered if he was doing the right thing and whether he would be able to survive in Stella's academy. His thoughts turned negative. He realized that it would be very difficult, and only a negative answer came to mind. He wished he had something that could help him and remembered that he had an unread notification that appeared after he had defeated his pursuers. The notification offered to select an item or skill, mentioning the return of light and praise with a flash, but the system gave it to high-level items. Then he decided to take the hyperspace flicker skill, but the system again refused and suggested only a slight improvement of the flicker skill. The system told us that the force that drives the plot is called the power of the story, and if the hero explores unknown branches of the story, this power will accumulate. So Baek Yusol can't get items for the late game because he's still a newbie. Then the player remembered Bulbul for the glasses. Then the system agreed with the hero for a while and gave him this item. Bullseye glasses are an item that contains all the information that the player has collected over time because the information could not be recalled in the game. So players have developed items to store information on their own player was no exception. Since the player is in real life, he cannot live using the game system, but the glasses will help to regain some of his skills. Someone started discussing a girl who was passing by. Her name was Isel, and they said she was the eldest daughter of the traitor Dutch Molf. One of the functions of the eyepiece allows you to register or verify information about a character in the story, so after checking it, Baek Yu-sol realizes that she is a fake character. To understand about the fake heroine, you need to know that the game Ethereal World is based on the fantasy novel Don't Love the Princess. This novel is about the heroine Isel who lost her family. She grows up facing the plans of Hong Byeon, and in the end, stays with the main character, her husband. Her plan of revenge completely disappears, and the male characters protect her, and the novel has a sad ending after harsh reviews from readers. The problem is that the world is based on a novel, but a character named Flame appeared in the game and took on the role of the main character. Besides, she had a backstory. She was an ordinary girl from the modern world who regularly read Don't Like the Princess and was transported to the world. Thus, Isel became a fake heroine in the game, while the Frame became the real heroine. Despite numerous attempts by the players, Isel could not survive on any route, and as a result, she was pushed out of the position of the real heroine. Baek Yu-sol had a feeling that he had seen Isel, and he decided to get ready. After a while, all the students were gathered for an introductory speech about dark demonic people and their invasion. For the students, this speech was boring because everyone knew that they were magicians, and their purpose was to protect the world from dark forces. The ceremony was followed by the swearing-in of 4 students who were admitted with high marks and a representative of the freshmen. The students went up to the stands, all with shining faces, befitting their position as protagonists. But among them, Ma Yu-sun was the brightest, handsome, and intelligent at the same time, and he scored the highest number of points. This character has a status of 9 stars, and has the potential to be close to the realm of the gods. He is a natural genius among geniuses, and can control all the elements of the world. Even if Baek Yu-sol can't reach the true ending, he should at least avoid bad endings by turning Ma Yu-sun to the good side. But it all depends on Flame how she behaves in the future, and since she is from the same reality as the player, they may get along. Things will be complicated if the girl considers him an enemy, so since Baek Yu-sol has the advantage in terms of information, he shouldn't take any chances. Although Baek Yu-sol's importance in this story is no more than a non-fiction character from a village shop. Moreover, the heroine has a special ability to purify dark people, but she also has the ability to impoverish people. Being around her will undoubtedly affect Baek Yu-sol, so his role is to support the main characters from afar and not to contact them if possible. At this point, the boys' thoughts were interrupted by applause and the induction ceremony was completed, along with the second episode of the Stella Academy induction. The player was sitting in the classroom even though he had graduated from university a long time ago. It was a strange feeling to be a high school student again. But still, he was given a watch that proves that you are a student of the Stella Academy. With them, you can get better treatment and service. Baek Yu-sol thought about how to use them as soon as possible and go to the city for a walk. The door to the classroom opened and a man with a large scar on his face came in and asked everyone to take their seats. The exam is about to begin, so everyone needs to remove all unnecessary items, and students who wear glasses will be subject to an additional check. The curriculum at Stella Academy is more rigorous than in Korean universities. On the first day, everyone passes an exam to be enrolled in the class. The questions on the exam paper were quite difficult. Baek Yu-sol did not even understand what was written there. The class placement exam has no relation to the entrance exam at the exam. Students are assigned to classes from F to S. All the main characters will obviously get the S grade, so Baek Yu-sol wonders if, although he is automatically enrolled in the F grade, he can turn in a blank sheet. Ma Yu-sung caught the boy's attention, and he was just sitting there bored, resting his head on his hand. Being a genius, he was the first to write an exam paper, so all I had to do was sit and be bored. Ma Yu-sun's characteristic feature was boredom. He was born into the strongest family in the world, and as a genius and talent, everything came very easily to him. That is why, depending on how the main character behaved, Ma Yu-sun's character could be defined as evil or good. Dark demonic people who work to destroy people obviously would be very interested in Ma Yu-sun. Baek Yu-sol hasn't written anything yet, but he mentioned glasses because he often used them during the game to gain skills by studying them in the library. Before he could get his glasses, the teacher appeared next to him and reminded him that when using glasses, they need to be checked. A man took Baek Yu-sol's glasses and taught him to check them carefully with magic. The boy was scared and panicked because he could be expelled from the academy. But the teacher didn't notice any mana and asked me to ask in advance next time. Putting on the glasses, all the answers were visible on the sheet, so at this rate, maybe Baek Yu-sol will get a grade even higher than he expected. At that time, the teacher loudly said that the exam was over, and I flew up with my exam papers and headed straight for him. Having managed to answer only 3 questions, Baek Yu-sol resigned himself to the fact that he would not be able to reach a higher grade. After reading the answers, the man made the boy quickly hand over his glasses, suspecting something. The teacher studied the glasses again and checked them even more carefully and asked one of the students to bring Dr. Grein in. Dr. Grein, a professor of magical engineering, looked at the glasses carefully and checked them with more careful magic than the teacher. The teacher asked if Baek Yu-sol had really cheated on the exam, and the professor assured him that he had not, and that he did not feel any magical energy from the glasses. Dr. Grein said that the boy had resolved the issue himself and advised Professor Lee Hanwol to apologize to the student and teach him well. The teacher admitted that he had made a misunderstanding and apologized to the boy, although he really cheated and it would have been problematic if all the functions of the glasses had worked. Professor Lee Hanwol's office was actively checking exam sheets. An elderly woman professor, Edeltamen, who was passing by, noticed Lee Hanwol and approached him. She heard that this year there are especially many interesting and strong freshmen. Princess Hong Bi-yeon of the Kingdom of Adolabit, who belonged to one of the most prestigious families in the etheric world, even nicknamed the Kingdom of Mud. Crown Prince Jeremy Scalban managed to defeat all his older brothers and became the Crown Prince of the Scalban Empire at the age of 12. Hei Wanryong is the heir to the world's best magic tower of archmages, the Twilight Tower. Ideal praised Lee for the many interesting questions on the exam, which were quite difficult to pass even for students from elite families, and the man thanked her. This year, a new type of questions was asked in the test for admission to the class, and the first 3 were exactly the kind of questions that ordinary students would find difficult to solve. A flexibility test where if you can't answer correctly, you skip it and quickly solve the next question. The era of cold steel is over, and now warriors magicians solve problems with creativity, logic, and critical thinking, turning their minds into weapons. However, these questions were destined to be unsolvable, as more than 1,000 out of 1,141 students left the questions blank. Most of the new students could not give any correct answers, and only 3 were able to answer all 3 questions correctly. Ma Yusun, who appeared like a comet and swept through the magical world, was called the genius of the century. Flame, who was recognized for her special abilities and talent comparable to that of Ma Yusun, entered the school on the recommendation of the principal. And among these geniuses, Baek Yu-sol, who appeared out of nowhere, was strangely among them. Ma Yusun and Flame are considered geniuses, but Baek Yu-sol had the lowest score on his entrance exam, and no one expected him to solve these 3 difficult questions. Professor Edel wondered why Lee Hanwol was so interested in Baek Yu-sol's assessments, to which the man replied that his assessments seemed to be meaningless. To which the professor objected that it made sense because, after all, formulas and equations could not solve them, so he could solve them without knowing anything. The man asked if Baek Yu-sol could be a genius, and Edel said that it could also be a coincidence. On his desk was Baek Yu-sol's file with a note that, in appreciation of his amazing ability to control the flicker, he was allowed to enter under special circumstances. This note was left by the director of the academy himself, Stella, so the professor was interested in what would happen next. The next day, the long-awaited results of the classification were announced, where even geniuses had no choice but to be nervous. The player also had to personally check which class he was in, even though the game could check it with just 1 click. The students noticed him and started gossiping that he had scored 0 points on the entrance test in the application of magic. When he looked at the list of F-ranked students, he did not see his name and thought he had failed the test by answering only 3 questions. Disappointed, he decided to leave, but when he heard the students talking about him again, he decided to come back and check the table again. Looking at the board, Baek Yu-sol was very surprised because his name was next to the highest class S. Class S was special. Unlike classes F and A, it literally meant that only students with something special got there. It was very unusual that the hero was assigned to the S class, a place that every student of Stella Academy, the most prestigious magical academy, dreamed of. So now Baek Yu-sol will have more contact with the main characters in Class S, which he wanted to avoid as much as possible, so he decided to think more positively. The territory of the academy was considered huge, even in the Arcanium, and thanks to all the necessary measures, students did not have to leave its territory. In addition, the academy had many private rooms for nobles, and Hong Byong's mother used to scold her in one of them. She was annoyed that the girl answered the 3 questions incorrectly because even Princess Izeli answered 2 questions. Hong Byong fell to the floor and listened to the reproaches of her mother, Professor Hong Yil, a professor of the element of fire. She didn't want the girl to become like her, kicked out of the kingdom and holding on to some stupid professorship. The princess cannot become a disgrace to the kingdom, She must become better than her sister told her mother. Hong Yil asked if the girl understood what her mother wanted her to do, and she answered in the affirmative. But she didn't understand, because she just lived the way she was taught and solved problems the way she was taught, and only quietly wondered why her mother was torturing her. The first class of freshmen, the entire classroom is packed with students, all waiting for the professor to start the lecture. The S class was full of eccentrics who showed no signs of being sociable, which gave Baek Yu-sol mixed feelings. When the students saw the boy, they began to say that their parents protested why he was in the S class, but they were told that Baek Yu-sol had all the necessary skills for this. It didn't surprise him, because they all worked hard, so they were really outraged that an unknown fool would be in the same class as them. According to the rules of the academy, students' classes are moved up or down depending on their performance after each test. And yet the player was still amazed by all the game characters in front of him. And in a few years, all the students of this class will become famous all over the world. 5 of these students also have the potential to betray the magical world, one of them being Ma Yusun. It would be nice if Flame could prevent this from happening. At this point, Professor Lee Hanwol entered the classroom to greet the students, and although many of the students had seen him, he still introduced himself officially. Some of the students recognized him and heard that the number of demonic creatures he was hunting had almost reached 4 figures. The man asked everyone to calm down and emphasized that this year there are many talented students and one unique student. The academy is a place where martial artists are trained for 3 harsh years of study, so the professor wanted everyone to show their best. The man asked if anyone had any questions and heard only silence, so he decided it was time to start the lesson. The attention of all the students was focused on the back door, where a girl with long silver hair walked out in a big gate. It was Hong Byeon. She was late, and she valued principles more than anyone else, which was quite unusual, so Baek Yu-sol decided to test her with an eyepiece. The information he was able to get was not much at the beginning, as Hong Byeon was a well-known character, and most of the information written here was already known. If Izel goes to the next world because of Flame, then Hong Byeong because of Flame and Izel, we can say that this is the inevitable fate of a thief. If Baek Yu-sol could, he would have saved her, but he's not in a position to do so. Although he feels embarrassed, he has to keep his distance. The teacher asked this girl to take her seat, and she looked at Baek Yu-sol and came and sat next to him, and there was a feeling that everything was going wrong. The professor also reminded that there will be a procedure for changing the staff for the staffs that students will use at school. In classes S and A, the staff will be replaced at the same time, which was a little annoying for the hero, but he was looking forward to it. Stella Academy has planned 2 important events, one of which is the ceremony of signing the contract with the family, and the second ceremony of receiving the wand, as in the case of the elite, which is the Stella Academy. The ceremony of changing the staff is just as special. Professor Lee Hanwol gathered everyone in a place where staffs from low to middle class are prepared. All students need to do is come up and choose a staff, because the process of replacing a staff is very difficult, but in fact they do not choose the staff, but vice versa. In the ethereal world, the staffs react only to the person who, in their opinion, is worthy to command them, causing a resonance effect. In essence, this means that you cannot use high-level staffs just because you want to. In any case, Baek Yu-sol doesn't know which staff to choose because he would have chosen the staff for the F class, but since he is in the S class, he needs to think. The stick that is best suited for a boy is a magic wand, because staffs are divided into 2 forms, short staffs and long staffs. Wands are usually wielded by knights who quickly destroy magic, and staffs are used by bishops who focus on a single blow with a longer spell time. The other students wondered which staff Baek Yu-sol would choose, but he didn't care about their opinions. Suddenly, one of the students approached the boy and boldly introduced himself as Uslek, but this was the first time Baek Yu-sol had heard the name, which surprised him. Uslek asked Baek Yu-sol what kind of staff he wanted to choose and recommended that he choose one that corresponded to the status of a commoner. Also asked him not to create problems for the teachers, to which the hero agreed and recommended that Uslek not create them either. This phrase made Uslek angry, so Baek Yu-sol decided to check him with glasses, but there was little information, so he was not important. In any case, the student came up to tell him that he was going to choose a staff, so the hero should be more careful. This is the staff of Edmuri Etemiri, which is the highest in the classification of staffs. The middle high-class staff is usually used by professionals, so no matter how talented a student is, learning on it will be difficult. Even professional magical warriors can hardly handle a middle or low-class staff. There is also one middle high-class staff that is not meant to be chosen by anyone, but rather to show off. The teacher ordered everyone to come up and stand with the staff they liked. As soon as Lee Hanwol's words were spoken, each student moved to the desired staff at once. Most of the students in class AS immediately resonated with the sticks. Many of them chose middle-class staffs including Prince Skalwan and Princess Hongbyeon. Everyone was surprised by this, because many magicians who have already received official licenses are hardly able to choose a medium-class stick. These resonances really irritated Uslek, so he decided to go over and take the staff of the middle-high class Edmuri Etemiri, which he coveted. He confidently picks it up because he wanted to show everyone what a real S-class looks like, but as expected, there was no resonance. The students were frightened because he seemed to be badly injured and quickly called the teacher, so Uslek had to surrender. After all, the owner of this wand had been determined from the very beginning. Ma Yuson approached Edmure Etemiri, and his shining eyes reflected a rare enthusiasm. Everyone doubted him, but the next scene dispelled their doubts. Ma Yuson managed to resonate with the staff too easily. The students' jaws dropped when Ma Yusong took out his wand and waved it. Even though the genius existed with their own eyes, it was still incredible. Looking into the crowd, Ma Yusong noticed Baek Yusol's gaze, and he smiled sincerely at him, which was unexpected. According to the game's storyline, Flame was the owner of another high-end wand, but things were different. When Flame conquers Taravon, it arouses the curiosity of Ma Yuson, who will be intrigued, which will make him interested in her. Otherwise, other possibilities open up. This girl was not a part of the game, and I had to keep in mind the possibility that they would go the wrong way. So the hero finally spotted Flame, who seemed to be moving confidently toward Turvon. The way her face frowned as she walked among the strange wands, it seemed as if she was not interested in Taravon at all. Since she was the protagonist of this world with endless possibilities, she could resonate with any wand. If she had resonated with the other wand just like that, it would have created difficulties if Ma Yuson's path had been erased, so Baek Yusol decided to hint to her. Although he didn't want to make contact with the heroes, he used Flicker, and immediately found himself behind the girl, which confused her a bit. Baek Yusol asked her in a friendly manner which staff she would choose, to which she snapped that it was none of his business. This confused him because he knew that Flame was very sociable, because she got along well with both nobles and commoners. But he could not back down so easily, and said that he wanted to help her choose a staff, but no matter what he said, she was even more angry. Baek Yusol said that he had heard a lot about her, and knew that the staff of Taravon would suit her and pointed to it. When he heard a strange noise, the guy turned around and looked at what was happening and wanted to take his hand away, but his hand seemed to become heavier. A heavy sensation of something gently stroking his arm. He checked his outstretched left hand, the silver stick lying silently under his hand. Before Baek Yusol could realize the situation, Turvon was the first to act, and a loud sound not unlike Edmure Etemiri Ma Yuson's was heard. In an instant, the room was silent and all eyes were on Baek Yusol's left hand, which made Flame even angrier. The academy campus was bustling with activity, and everyone was focused on the fact that this year there were 2 students who had entered the resonance with above-average sticks. There were only 5 of them in the entire long history, and 2 more appeared together in 1 year, and someone heard that 5 of them became archmages. About Baek Yusol, they were surprised that he used Flicker in a demonstration exam for magical skills, even though it was considered trash. Hearing these rumors, Flame continued walking down the corridor, thinking that it had finally become quieter. After class, the independent study building was filled with students, but all they talked about was Ma Yuson and Baek Yusol, which made her nervous. She wondered who Baek Yusol was if he could resonate with Turvon so easily. Flame read the novel 3 times before coming here, but such a character never appeared. It said that no one could capture Turvon, but to resonate with him so easily, as if Baek Yusol wanted to show off to her. Her thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice, and she hastened to hide her expression and turned around to see several girls walking toward her. They asked if she was planning to study on her own, and Flame, as always, addressed them as children. So one of the girls asked why she called them children. She again forgot that she was the same age as them, so she justified herself by saying that where she lived, she was always treated as the eldest. After realizing that she had been transported into the novel from the modern world, she could hardly behave like a child. One of the girls asked if Flame would be studying alone. It was Jackie, whom she had known for a long time and became fast friends when they entered the academy. Flame said she had a special extracurricular activity and agreed to meet at a cafe later. After chasing the girls away, she quickly turned around to leave, but then someone accidentally bumped into her. He was Wanriang, a boy with a sharp mind and crimson hair that went wonderfully with his violet eyes. He apologized and asked if she was okay, because she didn't look well and it was probably a rare occasion when he was so genuinely concerned. Then he also asked if the girl would be doing self-study, to which she said yes, and if he was going back to the exclusive S classroom. After exchanging a few more phrases, Wanriang smiled and said goodbye to Flame. Flame thought it was a bit rude and was about to leave when she noticed someone watching them. It was Jackie, but after being seen, she disappeared so quickly that eye contact seemed like a short dream, but Flame was not in the mood for that. So Flame came to a special additional meeting where she was interested in something more than the training itself. Princesses. Hong Byeon and Izil were to attend an additional class on the original fantasy novel, and there might be a confrontation between the protagonist and the villain. With these thoughts in mind, she came to the lecture hall where a special extracurricular class was taking place, and she slowly looked around. An additional lesson was taught by Kyle, a 17th ranked and A-grade boy who was theoretically one of the academy's best students. He was giving an extra class for those who lacked grades, but since there were many students from Class S, he had a gloomy expression on his face. Ma Yuson was sitting next to Baek Yusol, who seemed bored, but the genius was clearly interested in him. Flame thought that Baek Yusol hadn't solved anything but the 3 questions from Hell, just because he knew that would get him into S class. If Baek Yusol really knew in advance and behaved like that, then he is really dangerous. Flame finished her thoughts. At that time, Baek Yusol was sitting and thinking about how to get rid of Ma Yuson, who was looking at him and pretending to be modest and friendly. They had a short dialogue in which Ma Yuson asked why the guy came here, because in his opinion, he didn't need to listen to such things. In fact, he did not have any reason to be here. He was just ordered to participate because he had bad grades. Afterwards, Kyle asked us to stop talking and start an additional lesson. Today, they will be reviewing the placement test. As everyone knows, this placement test had notorious problems, and Kyle solved one of them. At these words, Hong Byeon's eyes sparkled, and that was the only reason she came to this place. Kyle saw that Baek Yusol was among the students and decided to prove to him that he was better than him. So first, he will show how he solved it himself, after which many students took out their notes and started writing everything down. This task is actually close to a trap. It was created to accidentally cause wrong answers, Kyle said. Baek Yusol thought that it was only a plausible decision, not the right one. But Ma Yuson, who caught this moment, blinked his eyes and tapped him softly on the shoulder. Ma Yusong asked if the boy thought it was right, and the hero was scared, but decided to be honest and said he was not sure. Although Baek Yusol spoke quietly, the room was so quiet that most of the students heard me, including Kyle. This angered him so much that he was so sure he was right that he invited the boy to solve the problem himself. He looked at Ma Yuson, who was supporting him, confused, and the hero thought that he had done it on purpose. Having no choice, he went down to the bottom of the classroom and took the chalk from the lecturer, put on his glasses, and started to make. It was said to be 3 questions of the devil, but in fact it was almost a meaningless question. For example, a magician says to the great earth, "Shed tears when he says this spell." The mass of the earth doubled. The answer to this question was simple. The elements of the earth grouped together, so the mass of the earth doubled. However, Kyle analyzed the problem from a mathematical point of view when the spell activates the elements, quickly combine under the influence of the mana catalyst and so on. Well, whatever the solution was, it didn't matter as long as the answer was correct, but Baek Yusol couldn't show how to solve it, only point out the mistakes. Baek Yusol. Yusol asked that if there was wind instead of earth, would his formula be correct? To which Kyle said that he would then use the second method. But Baek Yusol said that then you need to do things differently. And only by luck did Kyle get the right answer, not because it was designed that way. The guy didn't know much about magic, so he only pointed out the main part indicated on Bulbul's glasses. There was no need for complicated explanations, just to prove that Kyle's decision was wrong, but smart students understood the words and started writing them down. Flame was also quite surprised, but she remained calm. Rather, she looked at Isol and Hong Byeon. Initially, a fierce quarrel was supposed to take place between them at this point, but since they could not solve the problem that Baek Yusol had just pointed out, they were distracted by it. Shortly after that, the special extracurricular lesson ended and Baek Yusol left the classroom faster than anyone else. After saying goodbye to Ma Yusong vigorously, he walked down the shabby corridor and thought it best not to contact him. He didn't want to see him again. Gradually, there were fewer people and I was about to return to the dormitory, but in the corner of the corridor, someone was standing with his back to the wall. It was Princess Hong Byeon. The hero tried to pass by pretending not to know her, but she stopped in front of him. She had a question, and the hero was surprised that Princess Hong Byeon herself wanted to ask him something. She asked why Baek Yusol had not explained the solution to the infernal question earlier. But it's not that he didn't explain it, he just couldn't, because how can you logically explain a meaningless quiz? Baek Yusol simply had nothing to say, to which the princess misunderstood and thought that he did not want to explain the decision in such a place. So she promised to pay fair compensation so that he wouldn't come up with a solution, and she asked him to explain the decision to her. Baek Yusol and Hong Byeon rented a study room where no one disturbed them, and now they sat face to face with only a table between them. So the guy asked why she was paying him just for understanding 3 questions on the test, to which the girl said she had her reasons. He also asked her if she had solved all but 3 questions and he had only solved 3, and if she was ashamed of herself. The girl said no, but was only ashamed that she still did not understand them. She was a really good student, so Baek Yusol did not understand why she asked him for help, because she was a princess and she should have someone to help her. Hong Byong said that out of 1,141 freshmen, 3 students, including Baek Yusol, answered the question. These issues were very difficult, but Ma Yusin Flame and Baek Yusol solved them, so the princess had no other choice. Only then did Baek Yusol realize that these questions were tricky and why he was so easily in the S class. He also realized why Flame was keeping him. He didn't know the intricacies of the world, didn't even know about these insidious questions. But Flame is different because she read the whole novel even without knowing the plot of the game. She must know most of the plot parameters, even about 3 questions. Since the game was interfered with by an outsider who was not in the original Flame, there was no choice but to recognize the existence of Baek Yusol. After concluding that Flame had reasons for his behavior, the princess noticed that something was wrong with him, but Baek Yusol assured her that she shouldn't worry. So he decided to remind her that she had promised to fulfill his request in gratitude for helping her resolve the issue. Recalling that the blacksmiths from her kingdom were talented craftsmen, he asked them to turn his stick into a magic sword. The princess was surprised by this request because only low-level mercenaries use such weapons, but the hero only replied that it suited his style. He didn't want to explain his limitations, so he asked if she could do it, and she said that of course she could, because it should be easy. So the hero began his explanation by saying that the way to solve is to change perspectives, which surprised Hong Byong. The princess's weakness is that the magic she uses is strictly by the book, and that she is stuck in a routine. But she realized this only in her 2nd year at the academy after a serious defeat by Flame. Knowing that right now Baek Yusol will not be able to give her any important knowledge, but he can push her in the right direction. Turning the test paper toward Hong Bi-yeon, he seriously asked her first of all if she knew what a stupid question was. The girl was surprised by such an unexpected and simple question, but answered that she had probably heard it, but did not know what it was. So to explain that Baek Yusol gave an example, he asked the question of what is between the knee and the knee. The question confused the princess, but she gathered her thoughts and said that it was the back of her knee, to which the boy said that the correct answer was the same. Baek Yusol reminded us what is between the knee and the knee. Although it was an absurd question, it had its own logic. This made Hong Byong a little angry, but the boyfriend calmed her down and asked her to look into the matter more carefully. The task consists of formulas and tricks that the princess did not know, which means that it must be solved only creatively. So Baek Yusol asked her if it was possible to memorize this work like all the others, and she replied that it was impossible. Of course, knowing most spells and techniques is important for a magician, but it is more important for him to look at the world outside of his thoughts. Magic can develop even with the slightest change, but the princess thinks of things the way I see them, so spells should not only be memorized and recited. Hong Byong may be better at analytical thinking and judgment than Baek Yusol, but they lack an important trait for a magician: creativity. After finishing his monologue, Baek Yusol looked at the princess and her expression was very serious and intense. The guy asked if the girl understood everything because it sounded quite difficult, and the girl replied with determination and enthusiasm that she did. It's fascinating because Baek Yusol had no idea what he was saying, so he was glad that the princess understood and decided to start. The first question was what a person said to a horse when putting it to sleep, and the girl did not know the answer, but the answer was that it was time to go to sleep in the pasture. The next question was why the beds were working hard, and again the princess did not know, so Baek Yusol answered because she was always at work. The third question was what happened when the rock, paper, and scissors entered the race. Hong Byong was silent again, and the answer was that the rock rolled away and the rest remained. The princess was sitting in such tension that she was ready to throw up. Noticing this, Baek Yusol decided to ask an easier question. The next question was about what a cloud said to the ocean when it rained, and the princess thought a little and answered correctly that it gets a little emotional. Hong Byong was very happy to have given the right answer and smiled sincerely. It was the first time Baek Yusol had seen her smile in both the game and in real life. Baek Yusol praised her and said that her creativity as a princess was really second to none, and she accepted the compliment and asked the next question. After the end of the special lecture for Hong Bi-yeon, Baek Yusol immediately left the academy and headed to the Arcanium. In the end, the hero spent about 3 hours asking the princess questions, and he did not expect her to believe what he was saying. Hong Byong was definitely a good and intelligent magician, but her drawback was that she had stereotypical thinking. This does not mean that I, as a boy, could have used her to my advantage, for which I even felt very guilty, but it was important to forge Taravon into a sword. After summarizing the results, I had to hurry to the bookstore to buy the books I needed for my classes at the academy. After wandering around Baek-Yusol Lane for a while, he came to an unnamed bookstore. It was a rather old and hidden place. When the guy creaked open the door of the crumbling bookstore, which seemed to scare away even ghosts, he was greeted by the smell of musty books. Behind the counter, the old man was napping, this perv pretending to be napping and watching the guests with his magic detection skills. Baek-Yusol had a goal. This is a rather old book, Maella's handwritten notes. He was the one who graduated from Stella Academy 10 years ago. In the game, you could take a class by pressing a button, while in real life, you could read a textbook on the specialty. Baek-Yusol used to buy textbooks in expensive bookstores, but then he learned that much better textbooks were hidden in stores without signs. Maybe the grades didn't matter because he had smart glasses, but there were hidden recipes inside so he could find something useful later. No one touched it. Maella's name was clearly written on the handwritten notes on the theory of magical engineering. When the hero reached for it from the other side, someone grabbed the book he had chosen. Baek-Yusol turned his head slightly and saw a blue-haired girl a little smaller than him, convulsively pulling her hands away as if they were on fire. Startled, the boy called her by her first name. Aizel wondered how he knew her name, but Baek-Yusol said that she was famous. She tossed back the strands of her sky-blue hair and looked intently at the hero, remembering where she had seen him, but did not remember seeing him before the entrance. Mentioning that they were in the same group and said that she liked the explanation from the extracurricular activity but regretted that he did not explain it completely. If you think about it, Aizel couldn't solve all these problems, so when trying to solve the problem, she could contact Ma Yusun, or she could not. In any case, it was nice to meet her. She turned her head and walked in the other direction. By the way, why did she end up in a used bookstore? But the guy hastily pulled out Maella's notebook, and if he hadn't lost it, everything was going great. Then he took out the books one by one and looked at Aizel, who took out book after book, but strangely enough, she didn't care about the price tag. This bookstore sold mostly old books, so few people came here, except for poor students like Baek-Yusol. Aizel, as a person from a dysfunctional family who lost everything, probably had no choice but to come here because her father was destroyed by dark demonic people. It's quite sad that a princess like her came to buy used books, but she cares about the price because she has no money. Even in the novel, her end was tragic, and here, where Flame has become a heroine, she is doomed to disappear before reaching her tragic ending. While Baek-Yusol was choosing books, I collected more than 10, and when I put them on the tabletop, the old man opened his eyes in surprise, clearly impressed by my choice. Aizel squinted at him and the textbooks, noting that the subjects he chose seemed interesting to her. She was curious why he chose advanced sealing theory, even though the subject had few prospects and was not popular among others. Sealing is an ancient magic based on objects like wands, but with the development of alchemy and enchantment, it gradually became a lost technology. Aizel looked at him with an expression of incomprehension, and he was embarrassed to admit that he only knew about it because of the game. But he said that everyone would think that it was not a necessary subject, so it was easier to get the best grades in this class. Few people want to attend a class on compaction theory, but that's why Baek-Yusol can spend less time than others and get better grades. It was difficult to continue the conversation, so the guy jumped out of the store and looked back to see Aizel with a not promising expression on his face. The next day, Aizel checked the schedule and discovered that the first lecture at Stella Academy was a subject called nihilism. She had heard rumors that it was easy to get good grades there, so despite the fact that it was not her major, she hurried to apply to study it. However, when information spread that it was easy to get good grades, a large number of students gathered. Aizel, who always had to stay on top to get a scholarship, was not very happy with this. She would have to work hard on other subjects. As Aizel walked down the corridor, she suddenly heard students crowding around and discussing the lunch menu. Her stomach grumbled, reminding her of hunger. She had 60 meal tickets, but they were barely enough for the semester, so she had to save money all the time. On her way to the cafeteria, Aizel stopped by the hall where the Introduction to Seal Studies lecture was being given by Baek-Yusol, a student she had met yesterday. Just in case, she looked inside and noticed Baek-Yusol in the distance, listening to the teacher with a blank expression. She also looked at the other students, but there were not many of them. All of them people with bad grades. And if you apply for the Introduction to the Study of Seals, it will save time, improve your grades, and help you rise in rank and receive a larger scholarship. So, Aizel thought, Baek-Yusol already knew that it would be very easy to score a lot of points in this subject. That means he planned all his classes to make his life easier. It could be a coincidence, Aizel thought and moved on. Everyone knows about the origins of magic, but it was only when the White Wizard, also called the Forefather Wizard, spread magic in the world that people and other races were able to control it. Lidin, a professor of divine lunar studies, began his lecture. He was not popular because of his harsh and aggressive voice, which strained the audience. After natural magic spread among elves, metal manipulation among dwarves, and elemental magic among humans, the mage forefather disappeared. Baek Yu-sol was not happy because he had to go to school again for 3 years at this age. In the game, he could skip everything with one button. But this lecture is very important because it may contain at least a clue to the true ending the hero thought he would have. Baek Yu-sol looked around. Azel, who was sitting a little further away, caught his attention. Was she taking this class? As far as he remembered, there was no one else here. Not that Baek Yu-sol really cared, but it was rather unusual to see her here. The magicians started traveling the world and stealing the magic of other species, but this did not satisfy them. They wanted to learn more magic. This happened because the mage father disappeared, leaving behind the 12 new moons in the world, and the lecturer asked if anyone knew about them. Izel mentioned that the 12 new moons are guardians called to protect the balance of the continents, and only 1,000 years ago they spread all over the world. The professor confirmed that she was correct, and that each of them defended their continent using their special abilities. For example, the divine moon, the symbol of summer, the 6th month of the red summer, had a red flame, and it is said that this flame never went out. If you go into the deep sea of Alamanca, you can still see the red flames, and any of the students can go and see them. He wasn't joking, but the students burst out laughing because the depths of the Alamanca Sea were an absolute no-go zone ruled by the Sea King of Alamanca. The teacher calmed the students down and pointed to the board which showed the Levi's coast, a whirlpool in the middle of the ocean, frozen by the 12th month of blue winter. Each of the 12 months has individual powers, but it is said that if you put them together, a miracle will happen. But the students asked, what kind of miracle would happen? But no one knows what will happen because they fell asleep 1,000 years ago. Thinking that the lecturer was right, Baek Yu-sol mentioned that he had met several moons while playing the game, but he had met 5 of them only in a time-limited event. This became possible only because the player took information from other players in the community. He was the only one who met so many months. If the hero understood correctly, these months are the key to the true ending. No one could get to them, so the answer is hidden in them. At the time, he managed to meet only 5 at great risk, but he had no choice if he wanted to witness the true end. A huge doll bursts into flames, causing a powerful explosion during a lecture on practical combat as students fire magical attacks at a target. This practical subject was taught by Hong Byong's mother, Professor Hong Yil of the fire class. She told the students that it is not always important to shoot fast, and even if you have powerful magic skills, they are useless if you do not hit the enemy. Although everyone was listening to the teacher, the students' attacks exploded in midair, unable to even scratch the target. Then a very strong flash of magic appeared behind her, tearing through the air and almost certainly flying into the mannequin. A large explosion followed by a lot of smoke that covered the entire area of the damage, but when the smoke cleared, the dummy had only a few scratches. Professor Hong Yil took a look at the painting and came up to Hong Byong and said that it was just horrible. Hong Byong turned pale at these words but closed her eyes tightly, trying not to give away her chaotic emotions. Then the princess could not stand it and went and sat down on the bench and showed her mother a miserable sight again, so she thought that her mother was disappointed with her. The terrible pressure of failure came down on her chest and she fought against it, trying to catch her breath while cold sweat dripped down her forehead. Hong Byong thought she might faint, but she stubbornly held on, showing superhuman strength of spirit, and approached her while she was still sitting. She asked if everything was okay and sat down next to the princess to support her and ask her some questions. The girl was fascinated by the fact that the princess used the same magic as she did, but stronger. These words were disregarded by the fact that the princess did not even hit. But the girl didn't care that Hong Byong missed the target because the magic itself was unsurpassed and very cool in her opinion. The girl began to tell her that she had heard a lot about the princess and looked up to her, and Hong Byong remembered her. The girl's name is Arshuan. She is the genius of a new attribute of fire. The princess thought that this girl must be much worse than her in comparison to her magic. Since the princess remembered who she was and how she had shown herself in training, she said sarcastically that it must be nice to have such high accuracy. Arshuan, ignoring the princess's sarcasm, said that if she trained, she would not even be able to match the princess. Hong Byong decided to end the conversation abruptly and turned around and left, although she thanked us for making her feel better. Arshuan didn't like this manner of communication. She just gave her a blank look and thought that it was probably normal for a princess. She came to the restroom and sat down helplessly. Even her legs went numb and she lost all sensation. She was greeted in this room by the princess's personal bodyguard, Hong Byung Yuri, who was tall for a woman, so the princess looked up slightly when talking to her. Yuri put the princess's favorite delicacies on the table, tea and red ginseng candies. And the guard decided to talk about the stick that Baek Yusol had ordered, and she was told that since it was a good stick, a high-end sword would be made. But there was something that seemed questionable to her. She had heard that the wand constantly sucks mana from the person using it. The princess was surprised and thought it was a dark demonic instrument, but Yuri assured her that it was just constantly in resonance with nature. Hong Byon thought it was impossible for such a worthless object to be of middle-high class. It was downgraded to mid-range high because of its original ability to dramatically increase the user's mana. They both wondered how a student could use it. No one could use a stick like that because you either have a lot of mana or you don't. But Hong Byong was sure that Baek Yusol would figure it out. Anyway, he was really unique. A few days have passed since the beginning of the semester, a class taught by Professor of Obertology, Mani Carly. He emphasized that classes in mana orthology are mandatory because attacking magic requires more detailed study than other types of magic. Starting today, for student duels, they will study orbitology with an emphasis on shooting and targeting. So, the professor set a formula to determine which attribute is needed to solve the given formula. All the students fell silent and began to solve the problem the teacher gave them. Many people thought that the answer was an attribute of water, and if this attribute of water is not present, it is impossible to answer this question. But Baek Yusol was even bored, because these subjects are no more difficult than the ones he studied in Korea. The professor noticed the boy's boredom and was annoyed by it, so he invited him to come to the board and solve the problem. After a while, Baek Yusol solved this problem, and the professor praised him for organizing the Hyborg equation so easily. The teacher thought that his first magic was an attribute of water, to which the hero refused, and after a while, the professor ended the class. So Baek Yusol, having already packed up and said goodbye to the teacher, left the classroom immersed in his thoughts. But his thoughts were not. After apologizing to Isol Pass, she approached the boy and wanted to ask him a few questions. Observing Baek Yusol Islel, she realized that if you do not take into account his grades, he was undoubtedly smart. He was smarter even than the freshman Baek Yusol solved the question at a level that was at least professorial. Even if the Stella Academy is a place where geniuses gather, what is the personality of Baek Yusol? Isol wondered. At first, she thought it was not realistic, but now she is sure that he definitely has a strategy for registering for courses. So she asked him what the next subject he would choose, to which Baek Yusol thought and asked if he was interested, which made the girl a little angry. He is an adult and what he does is his business, and in any case, he asked why she was asking. Izel made inquiries about the classes he was taking, and it looks like all of them are where you can get high grades. She wanted to learn the same strategy because it was important to her, so she quickly ended the dialogue and told him it was time to go. She didn't like it very much, so she gathered her thoughts and called out to Baek Yusol, who was already going about his business. She caught up with him and asked him to wait, to which he said he didn't understand why she was following him, that she should learn strategy from someone else. He said that she could just go to the same classes with him, but she objected that it could negatively affect his grades. If Izel doesn't get it, she will lose the most, but even in this situation, she is worried about other people. The girl made a cute face and asked me to recommend her one subject where it is easy to get high marks. Her beautiful face did not impress Baek Yusol and did not convince him, which surprised the girl because usually looking at her face relieves stress. The girl laughed and said that she was joking and knew how Baek Yusol would behave, so she prepared a compensation for him. She had a story about the Phantom Tower number 7, and the hero knew about it, which surprised the girl because not many people know about it. Because it is an abandoned building that has disappeared, and there are many barriers that do not allow you to even approach the place where the tower used to be. At this point, Baek Yusol interrupted her and knew that this was very important information because it would strengthen the Flame's attachment to the male hero. Thus, the fact that Flame knows this means that in the novel it was Izel who knew this, and she was supposed to give this information only to the main character of the game. So Baek Yusol thought he was just a stranger and refused to listen, saying that it was a terrible story and it didn't sound interesting. She was surprised and said that the story was not that scary, and she would just tell it for free. At first he acted like he had to share the information, but then he changed his mind. Izel was very much in need of information, so she was persistent and sincerely wanted to share her story with Baek Yusol. Then the boyfriend agreed and advised her to take a meditation journey into the abyss as her humanitarian studies. The girl was surprised by the study of the divine moon and meditation, so she assumed that the boy was engaged in cultivation. He didn't know how to tell her and said that her teacher was a bishop like Isel, and through meditation she was able to increase her magical power. At that time, the importance of meditation was not yet known, so Isel's reaction was natural. However, after a very short time, most priests began to meditate for several hours a day. In this sense, meditation was an extremely important course for priests. Usually, Baek Yu-sol doesn't say that to anyone, but she's an exception because she's nice, which surprised her because a minute ago he said something completely different. Although this is not a subject that will help her grades, she signs up for it anyway and thanks the guy for his advice and goes about her business. As he watched her go, Baek Yu-sol thought about how his advice could change Aizel's future. But if he leaves her because of fear and she has a terrible ending to her life, it would be good if meditation could help her. These reflections made him realize that he was also a magician and why he hadn't thought about training and meditation. The character Baek Yu-sol diligently trains his body in the game by awakening magical body fortification and grows very strong and fast. In the game, you could gain experience with one button. Now he can do it directly because it's been quiet lately anyway, and Baek Yu-sol hasn't been able to gain experience. At Stella Academy, all students lived in a dormitory and were divided into classes from Class F to Class S. This system of dormitories was like a set room for the players, but for the boy, it became his only home because his hometown was burned down. Classes F and S were similar, but S had a separate room on the top floor, while FE had 4 and the others had 3 and 2 people. Although Baek Yu-sol was a bit lonely, he can finally use it to his advantage and for the right purpose. So he decided to meditate. His goal was not statistics, but since this was reality, he needed to get used to this body. In the game, Baek Yu-sol was a genius, as he was able to manifest the aura of the sword using the fact that mana circulates endlessly in and out of it. No one paid attention to him, so no one knew that Baek Yu-sol was a genius swordsman, the only one in this world who had reached the pinnacle of skill. His breathing controls the flow of mana through his body, so if you increase the amount of mana with each breath, you can get more at once. Skills are not acquired through experience alone. They need to be used, which means that all you need to do is train. Even after skipping dinner, the hero closed his eyes and focused on meditation, and when the sun began to rise, he opened his eyes and felt new changes. The player realized that these are the feelings that the character felt as if he himself had a syndrome since childhood, which was part of his weak but sensitive sense. The system notified him that the mana flow skill level was increased and the flicker skill level was increased. This motivated Baek Yu-sol even more, so with an inspired mood, he saw the chance that he would get the true ending. Practical classes have begun at the Magic Academy, and there were many of them, but in the end, students were looking forward to these classes. Classes are held in the Dome, a kind of pocket dimension that allows you to freely control the size of the place with its features. All sporting events and other types of events, as well as dungeon gates and monster training, are held here. There are 141 people in Class A, 50 students, and 41 in Class S. If it were like in the novel, there would be 39 students in Class S. Flame expected there to be 40, including her, but another student was added to the group and she doesn't know where Baek Yu-sol came from. In the original version, the total number of freshmen was 1,140, and after the addition of the new students, it became 1,141. In other words, he was in the novel, so Flame wants to find out because she is the only one in the world who knows the plot of the novel. Her thoughts were interrupted by the crowd that had gathered around Prince Jeremy. Everyone wanted to be close to him. He was also a kind of genius. He was a handsome man in very perfect shape, tall with a warm personality, and a smile that never left his lips. In the original story, he was obsessed with Isel, but in the end he was abandoned without being loved, so he became a villain. However, all of these were carefully calculated actions to manage his own image, and Flame thought it best not to get too close to him. When she looked at him intently, Jeremy turned his head to meet her gaze with a slightly surprised expression and waved his hand in her direction. He was terribly handsome. Flame quickly dodged his gaze, but the feeling after this brief eye contact did not go unnoticed. Then she turned around and walked in the other direction because she wanted to collect her thoughts and get ready. The noise of the heated chatter stopped all at once. Lee Han-wol began the lesson and emphasized that a little training was needed before the class. This should show the level of skill to properly teach each of them, but if someone does not like it, it is not the teacher's problem. Professors have the right to subtract and add points to students, and if they score less than a certain number of points, they can expel the student. The training will take place in a dungeon and there will be situations that occur in real dungeons, as well as monsters and traps to test everyone. 4 points for a level 1 monster, 8 points for a level 2 monster, and 20 points if you get a pointer. The 5 best students will receive small gifts, and those who fail will have their points deducted. You can also form teams, but the points will be distributed. Before disappearing from the dome, Professor Lee Han-wol also said that if you destroy another student, you can take away all their points. As soon as these words were spoken and the teacher disappeared, the ground began to shake and deform, frightening the students. The floor, which rose high enough to reach the clouds, took on the shape of a bean tree, and green branches and leaves blossomed everywhere. So the training started, and all the students stood there in awe and thought about their plan of action for the training. Flame was also a little surprised, but there was no time to think about it. And as she was about to leave, someone called out to her, which confused her a little. It was Jackie. She wanted to ask if Flame would be alone on the practical assignment, and if she wanted to form a team with her and the others. Although there are many advantages to forming a team while practicing in the dungeon, it was better to try this time alone, so she politely declined Jackie's request. The girl agreed with her, because then you have to share the points with your teammates. Flame agreed but thought Dejki was being sarcastic. After agreeing to assemble a team for the next time, they went their separate ways. As Flame walked away, she looked back at Jackie and thought that she felt like she was following Flame, but maybe it was just a phrase. An hour later, Flame was actively and quite efficiently destroying the monster and was already wondering when this damned practical task would end. After destroying another monster and thinking of a further plan of action, she was suddenly attacked by Ivy, which was a trap. But she easily deflected the attacker's attack and, using an attack spell, calmly destroyed the Ivy trap. Not only monsters, but even floor attacks. As expected from Stella's Academy, even the dungeon practice should not be underestimated. At the moment, Flame has scored 18 points, which is not a bad option, but it can all be covered with one wand, so it was worth moving on. As she was walking, she noticed something and at first thought it was a monster, but after looking more closely, she realized it was a person. But how can a student hide his presence to such an extent? Flame also hides his presence using the spell of blending in with nature. With Flame's ability to link damage, defense, and healing, it's a good choice for ambushing the enemy. While preparing to attack, she noticed that this student was Beck Yusol, who was also alone without a team. She was surprised that he was alone, although she remembered that students wanted to create a faction of Beck Yusol, but he rejected them all. Looking at Beck Yusol again, she noticed that he already had one wand, which was the perfect chance to attack and test him. A yellow-colored magic circle lit up at the end of Flame's stick. She used the magic skill very aggressively, Ball of Light. The distance was 15 meters, a distance at which he would not have been able to use defensive equipment, and therefore would have suffered great damage and been eliminated. Meanwhile, Beck Yusol turned his head sharply to meet Flame's gaze as soon as the magic was applied. Before she could finish her sentence, his figure disappeared like a mirage, using the flicker, and before that, his sixth sense. The ball of light crashed into the miserable tree and disappeared, and Flame sank to the floor with a frozen face, no trace of Beck Yusol's presence left. Meanwhile, as soon as Beck Yusol felt something similar to attacking magic heading towards him, he activated Flicker and teleported to the top of the tree. He was surprised that she wanted to destroy him using such magic. He was lucky that the level of the syndrome was higher, otherwise he would have been in trouble. He only has 2 flickers left, so if he uses terrain he can handle it, but he better watch out for her. Having gone very far, he thought that everything should be fine, because he shouldn't take any risks because his goal was 5th place. 5th place can be earned by the root of Adelica, which, when consumed, increased endurance and muscle strength to a certain level. The first 4 places will still be taken by the main characters, so in this state, they need 3 more sticks. Walking away, absorbed in his thoughts, the hero did not notice how he was met by an aggressive group of students. A guy named Raiden, who was quite famous at school, he belonged to the faction of Juslek, who was Jeremy's lackey. That is, they were members of a faction created by a member of another faction. To be honest, Beck Yusol was amazed because Raiden was holding 3 sticks in his hand. Raiden couldn't believe that Beck Yusol had answered the 3 strange questions correctly and was admitted to Class S. Recently, Stella has been accepting newcomers as well. The boys felt superior because they knew that he did not know how to use magic, so since they had already met, why shouldn't he give them his pointer? The students reproached the guy because what would he do to them? He doesn't even get his middle-class cane. First-class Flicker is effective against the weak, but it's unlikely to work on a talented mage from a prestigious family like Raiden. But still, Beck Yusol had another option, the pointer in his hand, and the fact that this place was a dungeon. When the boy held out his wand, Raiden approached with a haughty expression on his face. Raiden took it as a sign of surrender. The silhouette melted into the air, leaving only the sound of the fluttering robe. Raiden looked at Beck Yusol's face in surprise and put his hand to his head. Raiden was distracted from contemplating the huge blow, and the magic shield he always wore around his body shattered into pieces and shock overwhelmed his mind. At this point, Raiden instinctively reacted by spreading waves of mana around him to try to repel the attack. As the attacker disappeared, a wave of mana only sliced through the air, but Raiden snapped out of his daze and realized that one of the wands in his hand had been stolen. It was dangerous, but he was able to put his plan into action and showed the group of students that he had the stick. These sticks were really effective because they are a bug due to their great strength, They allow you to destroy magic. They have the power of most magic items. Although they help mages more, they can be very effective for Baek Yusul, who fights physically and has a weapon with a strong attacking ability. The students, led by Raiden, were about to attack again and prepared their wands, but their plans were interrupted by the trap they fell into. Taking advantage of the situation, the boys successfully hid from the attackers and ran behind their backs. Two guys noticed him and attacked him with water balloons, thinking that he would not be able to move falling from the air. Baek Yusul, possessing the enhanced sixth sense granted by the mana source, not only freely avoided traps but also flexibly used them as a shield. Thanks to his many years of experience in duels, he was able to make excellent use of the terrain. The guys were nervous, but Raiden was getting them drunk and preparing them to attack as soon as they saw Baek Yusul, and be careful not to have a magic bounce. After shortening the distance, Baek Yusul teleported directly to one of the boys and attacked him with his wands. One of the students was standing behind him, and being frightened by Baek Yusul, he interrupted the spell and created a magical bounce. Taking advantage of the moment when the boys were disoriented, the guy quickly stole the chopsticks from Raiden's hands. Baek Yusul stood there and bragged about stealing the chopsticks, thinking that if he ever got a girlfriend, he would give them to her. He thanked them for the fight because it was interesting and left them one wand because it would be unpleasant to take everything away. Princess Hong Byong quietly watched the whole skirmish between the group of students led by Raiden and Baek Yusul from a hiding place. Meanwhile, Baek Yusul was walking and thinking that if he had fought normally, he would have been robbed, but because it was a dungeon, he was able to steal the wands. As he was about to climb a tree, his sixth sense warned him of an eerie sensation that something was coming at him. Turning his head, he noticed that a huge fireball flew right over the place where he landed. Using Flicker, he moved forward sharply, and soon flames erupted in tongues of fire where he had been about to land a second before. The explosion was equal to a small bomb in terms of its force. Looking at the place where the explosion took place, there was almost nothing there. Even on the muddy ground, the sound of the heels of Baek's shoes was distinctly heard. Yusul patted himself on the head, stood up, and looked around. It was Hong Byong who slowly approached the boy and asked him why he hadn't taken the last wand from a group of students. The guy was surprised by her appearance but told her that she had misunderstood something, that he just couldn't take the stick away, and that she didn't care. The princess simply stopped and remained silent, looking at the hero with a blank stare. Then Baek Yusul realized that she was waiting for him to deal with them, and she would take all the sticks away, and they were wondering how she could do that. She thought again, and not finding a better answer, said that she was of royal blood and challenged him to a duel. Yes, I take the latter from a commoner would be unworthy behavior for a princess who is supposed to take them by winning a duel. Baek Yusul objected to her because it was not worthy to insult the weak, to which she said she had seen him play with that group from the beginning. The princess remembered how she was in a hurry because she didn't want her mother to scold her again, so she had to get more points as quickly as possible. But as she walked away, she heard someone's voices and, hiding, realized that someone was fighting with each other. Also noticed Baek Yusul in the battle and wondered whether she should attack, but it would be difficult to deal with 6 opponents alone. So the best thing to do was to wait until the end of the battle and easily take the wand, but her thoughts were confused by the fact that Baek Yusul had defeated the opponents. She was surprised that he didn't use any other spells besides flickering, as if he was playing and mocking them. Although the group of boys was weaker than Hong Byong, they still grew up among the elite, but Baek Yusul is just a commoner and he plays with them like that. This was the motivation for her to use all her strength to destroy him, because a commoner cannot be that strong. The sparks from her body began to fly in all directions, connecting the trees to each other, and waves of flame danced and swirled around the trees. The guy skillfully took advantage of the flicker and managed to dodge the crazy dance of the flames. As expected from a princess, it was really scary good that Baek Yusul had strengthened the sixth sense skill in advance. It's hard to dodge with just 2 jumps, so you need to find another way out. The princess wondered why Baek Yusul did not take out his magic wand, since all students are given a simple wand upon admission. But since he doesn't know how to use magic, he doesn't even need the wand, so he simply forgot about it and its existence. Looking at him, Hong Byong thought he was just laughing at her and, angry at this, told him that he should put in the work. Despite the fact that the boy doesn't know how to use magic, he was doing his best. The princess began her attack. A flurry of flames in the shape of a flower rose high into the sky, wriggling and hissing like a snake, trying to paint everything with its venom. Hong Byong was very determined to destroy Baek Yusul, so she used all her strength to the maximum. The idea was to take advantage of the enemy's distraction by drawing his attention to the lure. Baek Yusul barely dodged the massive flames that almost showered him with fiery kisses, but teleported away from the large column of flames that rose from below. So he thought he couldn't dodge jumps forever, because the area of attack is so wide. Every second, fire attacks flew at him, and although his experience level was low now, the attacks could be detected only with the sixth sense. As soon as the guy dashed behind a rock, deflecting all the flying fiery arrows, the next waves of attacks hit the miserable air. He was lucky this time, but even if Baek Yusol gets closer to Hong Bi-young, she will work her magic right away. He understood this perfectly well because he had lost in duels to fire mages before, but then he was playing with a mouse and keyboard, and now he was in reality. Since the princess was much stronger than she seemed, she fought in the open from Baek Yusol, and there was no wet spot left. It was hard to even call it a fight, but Baek Yusol was determined and would not sit idly by. He rushed into the attack as if running between arrows thanks to his sixth sense, trying to get closer to the princess. Using the pointers in his hands, he was even able to deflect several fire arrows that were flying at him at breakneck speed. The fact that he was able to deflect several arrows surprised Hong Bi-young very much, as she had never seen anything like it. She simply could not believe her eyes. Meanwhile, Baek Yusol's consciousness changed over time, and he felt the flow of mana fully, and his sixth sense became normal like sight or hearing. Hong Bi-young was concerned because it was a wild area filled with vegetation, which should have been an advantage for her as a mage with the attribute of flame. So she had no choice but to use her magic even more, and, having recovered from the shock, began to attack more actively. Noticing that Hong Bi-young is confused, he has to use the pointers to pierce her magic shield. At this unexpected moment, he activated Flicker and appeared in front of Hong Bi-young for a moment. Their eyes met, and the girl began to recite an eruption spell. This skill protected a mage with a fiery attribute from the enemy, but Baek Yusol easily coped with it because he had often encountered it before. Just one step back, and he was exactly 2 meters away from Hong Bi-young, and as soon as the explosion sounded, the guy approached her without wasting a second. So he took out the pointer and was able to strike, after which the careless magic shield broke, throwing her body back from the impact. Baek Yusol was the first to speak, boasting of his victory, and the girl asked him who he was, but he said he was just an ordinary student. Looking to the side, the guy said that he had noticed her a long time ago and let flame come out of hiding. When Hong Bi-young turned her head in surprise, a black-haired girl jumped out from behind the rock, and the princess still had a displeased expression on her face. Flame came out of hiding, although she said she wasn't even hiding. She was more interested in how Baek Yusol realized she was there. The guy justified himself by saying that it was just intuition, but he knew that it was his sixth sense from the mana leakage syndrome. Then she asked him how he knew he could pierce the shield with a training device like a pointer. So, there was no such moment in the original novel, and it will not be possible to simply explain it because Flame will not understand it. So he said that the pointers were quite strong, but the girl objected that pointers have their limits, and he decided that it could be used to pierce the shield. Baek Yusol had seemed strange to Flame before, but now, after what she saw, she asked who this Baek Yusol was. Hong Bi-young was very surprised by all this dialogue. She still hadn't accepted defeat, but she kept quiet and waited for the outcome. It all ended less than a month after the guy decided to give up his loud statements. Whether he should tell her the truth, but it was inappropriate, so he refused, saying that he did not wish her harm and wanted to help her. Taking advantage of the disoriented girl's moment, he quickly turned around and excused himself by saying that he hadn't had enough time to say goodbye. But before he could, something hit him on the back of the head. A dizzying sensation brought tears to his eyes, and the 4 wands fell belatedly to the ground. Looking back at Hong Bi-young, she was surprised that the wands were not caught, and said that he avoided the magic of traps and blind spots, and was unable to catch the pointers. There's nothing to be done about it, because the sixth sense has limitations, because this skill depends on Baek Yusol's mental strength, and his strength has just run out. So the guy asked her why she threw the pointers at him, and she replied that she had lost, so they were rightfully his. Probably pride is playing tricks on him, he thought, but he doesn't need so much because then his position in the rankings will rise and he doesn't need other prizes. Taking only 1 wand, he quickly walked away, wondering how Hong Bi-young and Flame were looking at him from behind, because men are cool when they don't look back. The girls, on the contrary, thought that he was probably stupid and, like all commoners, was not distinguished by his prudence. At this time, 12 professors and lecturers, including Lee Hanwol, stood looking at a hologram map levitating in the air. There were 141 red dots on the map, indicating students who belonged to grades A to S. Every year, at least one outstanding student entered the academy, but this year was particularly noteworthy because we had to follow not 1 or 2 students. Telix from the Council of Elders and Yarina Eon, a member of the Board of Directors of the Blue Tower of Magic, came to see it. Lee Han-wol was surprised that such high-profile people came, but he is sure that all the professors are watching. His thoughts were interrupted by one of the teachers, because not even a few minutes after the start of the training, the 2 best candidates had already made contact. They were He Wanryong and Ma Yusong. But after a short time, the duel began immediately and He Wanryong was already attacking with strong magic. On the screen, Ma Yusong circulated mana on his toes and rushed towards He Wanryong using hyper jump, and not just one but three at once. The average mage reaches the 3rd rank by the age of 30, while Mason is free to use it at 17. No one could believe the guys were using 3 elements of magic at once, because most magicians have only 1 element available to them, and it takes a long time to master at least 2. True talent is defined by mastery of 3 elements or more, and they both have had talent since childhood, but then something interrupted the professor's thoughts and surprised him. Suddenly, a huge demon burst into the sky. It was a kind of hidden boss event prepared by the professors as a joke, and there was no reward for it. A girl appeared on this body of a strange bird with no signs of life and frozen wings, and sparks flew all over her body. It was Aesel. Hidden bosses have never been found by accident. You need to have insight, common sense, prudence, and the ability to think. The eldest daughter of the Grand Duke, Morphus the Traitor. If her father had not been so, her talent would have blossomed even more. High-ranking mages would have started talking. Here Li Hanwol switched to the screen where the princess of the kingdom of Adolabid, Hong Bion, was fighting with an unknown student. While complaining, the elders focused on the screen and were very surprised to see the magical skill of Flicker, and they were able to see an unusual disciple. Flicker is a spell that many wizards have tried to cast, but have failed because it is impossible to control. But there is a student who can completely subdue and control the spell as if the Flicker were part of him. This student's name is Baek Yusol, and he is a very unique student who uses Flicker as a specialization, explained Li Hanwol. Then one of the elders wondered why he didn't use other types of magic, so he could have easily won a long time ago. When everyone was asking the same question, there was a sudden crack and a man's voice interrupted and said that this was a serious match. Li Hanwol's heart skipped a beat and almost fell. The very familiar yet unfamiliar voice was the great sage of the 9th grade, Eltman Eltwin. He said that the way he fought reminded him of the code of honor that existed in ancient times. Eltman mumbled as if talking to himself, but the mages were stunned by these words, for in the age of magic, chivalry disappeared along with cold steel. Li Hanwol mentioned that the code of honor is the way of thinking of knights who wielded swords despite living in the world of magic. The essence of the heroes who have been protecting the world from evil since time immemorial, as they say, they always went to battle with evil only with a sword in their hands. It's still a good idea to take up arms when there is magic, but this student is really using a pointer as a sword. But if the great sage considers it right, the elders have no choice but to accept it. The first training session in the dungeon was already over. Despite his 2nd place, He Wanrian felt defeated, so he immediately went to the S-class training ground. Out of 141 students, 39 failed to pass, and Ma Yusong took only 6th place. He was very sorry that Aizel had interrupted his fight with Ma Yusun. If he had had a little more time, he would have won. It has always been the case that Ma Yusun does not take everything seriously and still achieves high results in whatever he does. Even in the practical task, He Wangrian placed magic circles all over the territory and carefully analyzed his actions, and Ma Yusong easily accepted his attacks. He was very concerned about whether there was no way he could beat Ma Yusun or whether the difference in their talents was so great. From the very beginning, one after another magical skills sparkled, and the Scarecrow did not even have time to activate its protective abilities and was bombed beyond recognition. At that moment, Hong Biong came in and was surprised that it was He Wanryong, who is usually so calm and angry as ever. Hong Biong frantically cast the magic of the flame attribute and hit the effigy with all her might because she was angry at her defeat. Even though she lost 1 pointer, she took 3rd place. Her mother seems to be happy, but if she hadn't won, she would have been punished. Seeing Princess He Wanryong, it seemed to Wanryong that perhaps her magic had become stronger and more precise. Her fire magic is incredibly powerful and must be difficult to control, so the guy was surprised that she had advanced so much in such a short time. Reluctantly, the girl admitted that her classes with Baek Yusol helped her, both in terms of learning to solve difficult questions and her magical abilities. A simple plebeian with terrible grades and character, but the only one who knows how to deal with the princess's weaknesses is the opinion Hong Biyong had of Baek Yusol. Then Terran interrupted her train of thought and said that the stick she had ordered to be forged had already arrived. So, after informing the princess, her protector wanted to go immediately to see Baek Yusol, but Hong Biyong grabbed her shoulder and stopped her. She decided to give the wand to Baek Yusol herself, so she came to the 2nd tower, where the laboratories and faculty chairs are located, knowing that he was there. She is tormented by remorse. She could have passed the stick to someone else, because everyone might think that she is running after a commoner. And while she was doubting her choice, someone called out to her which disoriented the princess a bit. Hearing that it was a familiar voice, Hong Byeon smiled and looked up. It was her mentor, Hamerl. She apologized for calling her a mentor because she had recently become a professor, but Hamerl seemed not to notice, saying that the princess had matured a lot. But the professor wondered what the girl was doing here, and Hong Byeong said that she just had some business here and would be leaving. Also, the mentor said that some important people in the world of magic had arrived and were making a fuss about a student named Baek Yusul. But Hamerl was sure that the princess already knew because they had a duel, and that student did not use magic. The girl was embarrassed that her mentor had seen the fight and felt sorry for showing such a poor performance to a person she respected. Noticing the girl's excitement, Hamerl supported her by saying that he really fought to the best of his ability, even though he didn't even use magic as his credo. Having watched their fight, the director of the academy said that he saw it as an attempt to restore the code of honor that disappeared many years ago. She was surprised and shouted that she could not believe that the guy wanted to return the knighthood. It sounded very unlikely. However, when she remembered the fight, she realized that he was using a pointer as a sword, so that's why Baek Yusul wanted a magic sword. Only giving up magic at the magical academy would be an obstacle. The professor agreed with this, but said that he chose this path himself despite this. The fact that Baek Yusul continues to push himself further, even after reaching a high level of skill, was awe-inspiring to the princess. When the sun began to set, she stood still for a long time as if nailed to the spot and thought about Baek Yusul's credo. If he had told anyone that he wanted to become a knight, they would have laughed at him. But still, Baek Yusul sincerely wanted to become one. During the battle, she was angry and thought he was mocking her. The girl was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't notice Baek Yusul coming up eating Ethel's roots. He said hello to Hong Byeong and asked her what she was doing here, to which she said that she was obviously not here because of him, which made the guy laugh. Embarrassed and with a blush on her face, she handed Baek Yusul Taravon and mumbled something under her breath, clearly embarrassed by the moment. Opening the box, as expected from the Adolbites, the craftsmanship is unmatched by anyone else, and it was good that he helped the princess. Hong Byeong also allowed Baek Yusul to keep the box, who was already thinking about selling it. However, she couldn't help wondering if the boy was really not going to use magic, but she immediately became embarrassed and left him without saying goodbye. Having no choice but to leave, he was interested in the girl's words because Professor Lee Hanwol had told him something similar. Like he supports the guy's intentions and respects his credo, but with this magic sword he will be safe enough in the next episode. So we had to try the new sword in action, so it was sold to a special training ground for the S-class. Simply by channeling his mana into the stick, it took on the shape of a sword and gleamed with a white, mesmerizing glow. If Flame took it, it would be cool because she was a human who had the magic of elves, dwarves, and angels, which made her unique. This wand constantly absorbs the wielder's mana, so not everyone can use it, but Flame maintains its mana with the energy of nature. Although Baek Yusul constantly absorbs mana, it does not accumulate in his body. In other words, the concentration of mana in his breath becomes the source of Taravon. Thanks to the prize for 5th place in the practical training, his strength has improved a bit, so he should start training. And since he now has a weapon, he can directly raise his characteristics without spending experience points, so now he will have little free time. After a while, the day came for the compulsory Defense Against Magic class taught by Varian, a lecturer in the Defense Against Magic class. The lecturer said that from now on the students would start practicing real magic, so he divided everyone into teams and told them to get their wand. Varian was glad that there were a lot of tantalizing students in this group, so he divided them by level. However, he noticed Baek Yusul and remembered his achievements in his head. He was not happy for the guy, but rather hated him. When the lecturer approached him, he asked why he was doing nothing, and he said that he was studying another defense technique, so he had nothing to learn about basic magic. Varian was curious because, being corrupt and sycophantic to children from rich families, he considered it impudence. He had heard that Baek Yusul was not even capable of using magic other than flicker, which had deprived the lecturer of his. In this case, he asked me to demonstrate this cool defense technique to the rest of the students. To stay in this academy, an ordinary lecturer needs connections, so Varian asked to be an opponent of the guy Morso Dordan from the Empire. Because if he can beat an S-class student, it will only be to his advantage, so regardless of Baek Yusul's opinion, they were asked to come on the platform. Once on the platform, the boys waited for the lecturer to give Morso the command to attack Baek Yusul. Morso Dordan was also in the Uslek faction with Raiden, so the guys supported and shouted threats at Baek Yusul. Perhaps it was for the best, Baek Yusul thought, because he had to take this class because it was compulsory, and he had nothing to do here. Well, Varian has always been known for his bad temper since the first one, but at least this way the guy can see the results of his training. So the lecturer emphasized the rules of dueling. One of them attacks and the other defends. Then it is forbidden to change and use magic in the wrong turn. The duel will begin when Varian says and Morso starts first, so the students began to worry about Baek Yusol because Morso has the attribute of Earth. Soon, the lecturer ordered to start, and Morso decided to use second-rank magic, even though only first-rank magic is allowed in a basic magic workshop. With evil intentions and thinking that he might be able to destroy Baek Yusol, Morso used the spell Chopping Boulder. Without much effort, Baek Yusol simply slashed the spell that was flying at him, which surprised everyone, especially Morso. Even Varian couldn't believe his eyes. The magic would not have disappeared from such an attempt, but Baek Yusol undoubtedly dispelled the spell. All spells follow this path of mana, i.e., if you dissipate mana, the magic will be dissipated. Baek Yusol, at this time, was enjoying the moment. While he had trained all these days without rest, now he could barely dispel a third-rank spell. Morso was very angry because how dare he touch his magic, and Varian thought that Morso could not lose because then he would be in trouble. So he said that he has a good technique, but there is clearly a limit to how many spells he can cast if his opponent becomes more aggressive. Understanding the lecturer's hint, Morso immediately began to recite a more serious spell and directed it at Baek Yusol. It looked like he was going to cripple him so badly that it was too much. The students wondered why the professor didn't stop the duel. But in a flash, a flurry of small boulders flew like rain into Baek Yusol, and Varian stood there in awe. Quickly analyzing the situation, Baek Yusol calculated that 11 boulders were coming at him if he couldn't use Flicker. He has only one way to block all of them, which he successfully did, which made his opponent very angry. Morso went too far. It was obvious that the magic skill he used was at a higher level than a magician in the first grade of high school. Morso's fruitless attack irritated the lecturer, because if he loses, Varian will be in big trouble. Meanwhile, Baek Yusol was surprised to find that he had just repeated the fan technique from a completely different game. The disadvantage of the fan was that it required several times more mental effort to keep Taravon in shape and frequent breathing. In addition, its defense was weaker than other skills that block single but powerful magic attacks, so it's good that it's just a duel. The students around me began to say that it was an amazing technique that no one had seen in textbooks. How many people in the world could perform such sword stunts? As Morso prepared his next attack, he was very angry. He could not bear to see a commoner disgrace him in front of everyone. The students noticed this and became worried about Baek Yusol again, but only Varian was happy about it because he was the one who was in danger. When Varian still did not stop fighting, someone came out of the room and addressed him with these words. The students stepped aside to make way for the owner of the voice. Prince Jeremy Scalbin had been calmly watching from the back, but then he came over and asked why the professor was not finishing the fight. Seeing his smiling face, Varian, like Morso, turned pale, but the prince asked another question. Why did he not let Baek Yusol attack? Morso's behavior was not suitable for a freshman fight, and his opponent could have been seriously injured if he had made a mistake. The students were outraged. Varian was so focused on the duel that he did not notice the reaction of the students who were ready to fight for their rights. Thus, the initiative passed to Baek Yusol, who did not swing his sword quickly, and the magic shield shattered, and the friendly duel ended. Prince Jeremy watched the events and was somewhat happy that Baek Yusol won because he did not expect it. Later, in the volunteer room, Jeremy was giving Morso a preventive talk, and he fainted from the number of blows. Next to them stood a girl named Virajane, whom Jeremy asked to look after his friend after the conversation, because it would be a shame if something went wrong. In the Scalvin Empire, where the heir is determined solely by magical abilities, Prince Jeremy Scalvin outran his brothers at the age of 12. The very fact that Morso is no longer a loyal subject means that the Dordogne is excluded from the political world of the empire. Not only Morso, Baek Yusol had also caught the attention of Prince Jeremy and would no longer be able to live in peace, Virajani thought. The next day, the student group in which Flame was present was preparing for a new alchemy lesson. After the demonstration of Baek Yusol's defense techniques, two rumors spread through the school. The first, of course, being the rumor of Baek Yusol's knighthood. And the second was that he defeated Morso Dordogne. But Flame was annoyed by the gossip because everyone was talking about him. Not that she was looking for attention, but she didn't like it. Flame looked up and alchemy professor Mycen Tyron just clapped his hands to get the students' attention. She started the lesson with the basics. Alchemy requires precise measurements and accuracy, just like temperature control. Today, the professor emphasized that the students will be preparing the Tyron Fatigue recovery potion she developed. To be honest, it was a bit complicated for Flame, but if you do everything they say, you'll be fine in alchemy class. Alchemy is a very precise science, so Flame tries to avoid it, and she was also very distracted by what was happening in front of her. Mycen Tyron yelled at her assistant Altalisa for getting too close to a dangerous ingredient. However, Professor Mycen Tyran was destined to become a dark demon later on, so she had no choice but to take an alchemy class to prevent it. Remembering that Baek Yusol was also in the class, she wanted to see what he was doing because she thought he was there to get closer to Izel. But Baek Yusol seemed oblivious to Izel's presence, completely engrossed in alchemy. Flame thought he was a pervert when she noticed how much he enjoyed it. Since Flame had good dexterity and concentration, she quickly managed to make the Tyran Fatigue Restoration Potion as instructed by Mycen Tyran. Flame looked at Izel. She was fine and everything looked normal, but Izel had made a potion to restore Tyran's fatigue just like Flame. While working on the original, she accidentally acquires Maella's notes on magical techniques from an old bookstore. Oddly enough, a detailed alchemical formula was written down in them, and following it, she accidentally created an anti-fatigue remedy superior to the Tyran Fatigue Restoration Potion. Her embarrassment was interrupted by Mycen, who told Baek Yusol off for changing the ingredients, to which he replied that it was more effective. But it wasn't the Tyran Fatigue Potion he'd been told to make, and then Flame realized that he'd made the potion Izel was supposed to make. The woman told Baek Yusol that he did not even listen to her, which is why commoners are simply not suitable for them. In the novel, this phrase is, "That's why your family is in decline," and it was directed to Izel. These words hurt her, and she was not herself until she finished the potion. What if Baek Yusol knew about this and deliberately got in front of Professor Mycen to shield Izel from it, Flame thought. The professor has a lot of influence in Stella's academy, and if you dislike her even once, you can feel the consequences in your grades even in other classes. Meanwhile, the professor yelled at Baek Yusol for his manner of communication and said she would call his parents, to which he replied that he was an orphan. The alchemy was so interesting that Baek Yusol got too carried away and completely forgot about the unpleasant development. Whatever Mycen said had nothing to do with Baek Yusol. He thought maybe tomorrow he could make a decoction of Coca-Cola and kimchi for lunch. Time passed unnoticed, and a few weeks later, Baek Yusol changed the professor's recipe again, using the wrong materials to improve the results. They were arguing again, so Baek Yusol decided to check her with his glasses and saw that the progression of dark magic infection was already 21%. It was the beginning of the 8th episode of the game in which Mycen could not overcome her negative emotions and went through a dark demonization, becoming one of the villains. As soon as the influence of the dark demon reaches 90%, it will completely become a monster. But until the progress reaches 50%, it cannot be detected by magic. Now, Baek Yusol will not prove that she is an accomplice of darkness, so you need to provoke her, and when the progress is more than 50%, lay out the demon killers. Normally, a demon's blackening can be removed before I'm fully demonized, but Mycen is a demon contactor, which means she joined the alliance of her own free will. The 4th episode hasn't even started yet, and there's already a strong boss. And if you don't take action, she'll turn the other students into demons. Baek Yusol's behavior irritated Mycen, so he can't expect good grades in this subject. The more attention you pay to Baek Yusol, the less others will get hurt. The better to work on your body instead of your lessons, the boy thought. However, his joy came to an end when the practical exam came, which was a group project. The group consisted of 4 students, and looking at Baek Yusol's group, one might think that they were mourning, but Baek Yusol decided to get to know everyone. After he introduced himself, the others introduced themselves, Ka Sahan, Mal Lebanon, and Izel. But this did not encourage the group, it seemed to make it worse. One of the boys said that Professor Mycen gives bad grades to all the students she doesn't like, but Izel interrupted him and said that there was no reason to give up. The practical exam is conducted by at least 3 alchemists from the Castle of Alchemy, which means that the professor will not be able to influence their performance on his own. Izel's words really encouraged the group of students, so they promised to try their best and successfully complete the task. However, making a potion of Power D will not be a problem for them thanks to their shared knowledge, but they need to gather the best ingredients. So to collect the main ingredient is the tail of the fire lizard, so he needs to carefully select the ingredient so that it is fresh. Meanwhile, Professor Mycen Tyran called one of the students and asked him to send this note to the first-year students of Group C Alchemy. But the exception should be the 12th group, in which Baek Yusol is located, because they do not need to know this information. The practical exam in alchemy is conducted by officials from the Castle of Alchemy. If Baek Yusol shows a miserable result, he will not become an alchemist. The S classroom where Flame usually trains, when a boy suddenly approached her and handed her a note from her professor. It was a note from Professor of Alchemy Mycen, who warned me not to tell anyone about this note and that she should understand. The note said that the task of the practical test had been changed from the Potion of Vitality to the Potion of Tyran's Instruction. So, if Baek Yusol knows the plot of the novel, he will prepare for the incident and bring the scales of an italic spider instead of the tail of a fire lizard. This is how Flame got a chance to test Baek Yusol on whether he knew the plot of the original novel. The next weekend, using the portal, after which Baek Yusol got a headache, he arrived at the Dayreville Stadium. Then someone began to speak in front of him. It was a guide who greeted Baek Yusol and called him a magician. It was a little confusing for the guy because he was just a student, but the guide said that the students of the Stella Academy deserved to be treated as full-fledged magicians. Passers-by were interested in him because Stella's school uniform was designed so that everyone could recognize her. It gave away Stella's identity as a cadet. Thanks to Stella's watch, it was possible to use portals that usually cost 100,000 credits for free. The hero left the stadium and headed towards the swamp, looking for his target, knowing that fire lizards must live here. The fire lizard's endurance and strength are higher than those of local animals, and to defeat it, you need second-rank magic due to its high resistance and mobility. Before that, Baek Yusol had already tried his hand at monsters with the first security level, and it was just a matter of time before he could handle the second level as well. Thanks to his sixth sense, he knew that a fire lizard was already nearby and knew where it would attack from. Since lizards immediately rush at the enemy due to their mobility, she quickly approached Baek Yusol, but he was faster and destroyed her with one blow. However, lizards move in groups, and in a second, other lizards came up. But for Baek Yusol, it was only to his advantage, so he collected many ingredients. For the next alchemy lesson, everyone prepared their ingredients, and Isel looked around and said that all the ingredients were fresh and everything should go well. So now, all they had to do was prepare the potion correctly. So after motivating the whole group, they waited for the practical exam to begin. Suddenly, the front door to the classroom opened and 3 alchemists entered, accompanied by Altalisi and Professor Myson-Tiran. She emphasized that it was time to start and reminded us that the task of this exam would be to prepare a potion according to Tyran's instructions of rank B. The 12th group was surprised, and Isel exclaimed that they thought they had to make a D-rank life force potion. The professor said that she had sent out an alert that the topic of the exam had changed to a potion of Tyran's instructions, and looking around, Aesel saw other ingredients. Baek Yusol finally figured out how the professor wanted to punish the boy, even though he didn't care, but he would hate to see others get hurt because of him. Looking at him, Flame thought that he must have known about the events in the novel, but why did he fall into this trap? So, since the 12th group prepared the wrong ingredients, they disregarded the code of alchemy, so the professor wanted to disqualify them. However, Baek Yusol interrupted her and said that he would prepare a potion more effective than necessary, as he had done before. The key ingredient in Tyran's potion is the scales of the italic spider, which have a wide variety of nutrients. Tyran potions are created by heat treatment with it as a base. So Baek Yusol plans to prepare a heat additive using the tail of a fire lizard. Professor Maiden agreed to this with the certainty that they would not succeed and emphasized that they would be given only 1 hour. His group was worried that they would fail, but they had no choice but to try. Baek Yusol asked them to just trust him and that it was better to try than to be disqualified, which encouraged the group and lifted their spirits. The player recalls that alchemy was one of his main hobbies in the game and that he wrote down every recipe, and among them was a recipe for a potion of Tyran's rank B. Initially, the boy did not plan to brew it because Professor Myson would invent the potion herself in the future. The scales of italic spiders store so many nutrients to hatch eggs, which makes them look like the tail of a fire lizard. It is said that the leaders of the Alker tribe from the southern sands eat them to improve their health and also to extend their life expectancy. Someone knew the Alker tribe's method of cultivation. Someone knew the manual method of drying, so they divided their duties and began to prepare the potion. Exactly an hour later, with the joint efforts of the two, the potion of Tyran's B-rank instruction was ready, which surprised the representatives from the alchemy castle. While one of the representatives was evaluating the potion, the professor was very angry because she had been working on the formula for many years. The alchemist said that, although there were a few too many ingredients, this potion was much better than and more effective than Professor Myson's. Professor Myson bit her lower lip at these words, as if her invention was at best inferior to the potions prepared by the students on the spot. She asked them to hand her the potion, and the alchemist dutifully handed it to Myson, who had no choice but to adopt a bewildered expression. The potion undoubtedly contained a technique unique to Myson, which involved extracting nutrients from the demon and replacing them with human life force. However, the professor is still the one who gives the grades and can disqualify the 12th group for incorrect components. As the alchemists showered the group with favorable reviews, Myson had no choice but to keep her mouth shut. So, having bent down before the alchemists from the Castle of Alchemy, she had no choice but to give the points to the 12th team. The professor, who was very angry, promised herself that she would take revenge on Baek Yusol, so the progress of infecting Professor Myson-Tiran with dark magic increased. In the evening, after the exam, Flame practiced on the S-class training ground. She was exhausted and decided to finish her training, because although she was young in body, she was still middle-aged before she appeared in the novel. While Flame stood there silently listening to the explosions, several students jumped out from behind her, one of them crying and the others comforting her. It was Arshan who was crying because the princess had beaten her in controlling magic, even though she had been practicing for years. Hearing this, Flame's expression changed because Hongbyong's ability to control will definitely start to grow as she moves into her second year. Something could have changed the future. Someone made her realize her creativity at that moment. The suspect Baek Yusul came to mind, accelerated her development somehow. Even the practical exam in alchemy went strangely well. Azel was supposed to invent the potion formula in the future, and Professor Myson was to take it and complete it. How then does Baek Yusul know a recipe that did not appear in the novel? And he also seems to have been unaware that such an incident would occur. Then, if he knows things from the future but is not familiar with the plot of the novel, he may have regressed rather than inhabited the character like Flame. It sounds logical that Baek Yusul is from the future, then maybe he remembers different things from there, but he doesn't necessarily have to know about small incidents. According to the novel, Ma Yusun once received an attempt to return to the past from an entity that has power over the time of the 11th month of the Silver Age. Then He Wanriang noticed the pensive girl and came over, interrupting her train of thought. Flame immediately asked him if he knew Baek Yusul, and he didn't understand why she would want to know, but he only knew that he was a strange student. The guy asked Flame if she was really interested in Baek Yusul, to which she said yes without hesitation, which tensed the guy up. So the girl thought that apparently Baek Yusul really knew the plot of the novel and said that it would not work and she would not stand still. She said that it was time for her to confess her feelings to him, so she got ready to leave immediately, and He Wanriang's heart almost broke. Thanking him for listening to her, Flame quickly left the training ground and disappeared into the corridors of the academy. He said goodbye to Flame without understanding and stood for a few more minutes, after which he also left the place with his head down. The next day, Baek Yusul had some free time, so he sat in a cafe with a cup of hot coffee and lost himself in his thoughts. At the moment, the progress of the Dark Demon's influence on Myson Tyran has reached 37%, which means that the incident will occur within 3 months. The influence of a Dark Demon randomly touches one of the students. There are 3 candidates, Jackie Ashwang and He Wanriang. The worst-case scenario is He Wanriang, although this rarely happened in the game. But you have to be especially careful with the demon's influence on him because it can lead to a bad ending. When he left the cafe and walked slowly toward the training ground, Flame was sitting in the garden and saw Baek Yusul and got up and came over. She came close enough to wave her short black hair and asked him sternly who he was because last time he hadn't answered about his identity. The hero thought about it again, but it made sense to tell her who he was because she would clearly be a reliable ally. Telling Flame the whole truth and getting information from her can really help you get to the bottom of this. Before he could say a word, a warning appeared in front of him that he could not disclose the fact of his transfer to a key character. So Baek Yusul said that they both have secrets that they shouldn't reveal, so they should only discuss it superficially. Then the girl was the first to ask if the hero knew what would happen in the future, although the guy said on the surface, but she decided to dig deep. If she asks him this, it means that she also knows what the guy answered and asked what she wants to study at this academy. Flame replied that she wanted to avoid a collapse because this world is unstable and asked why he was behaving this way. Not knowing what to say, he thought it would be best for everyone and thought that this would probably be enough. Thinking it was a lie, Flame got angry because he definitely has a purpose. He definitely has to benefit from it. Baek Yusul decided to correct her by saying that he didn't even know what he wanted. The only thing he needed was to survive. Then she looked up sharply and met Baek Yusul's teary-eyed gaze, which made his heart sink, and he turned and ran away. Baek Yusul stood there in a daze because it was something ridiculous, and at that moment He Wanriang quickly approached him and asked why Flame ran away in tears. Ma Yusong's rival, the strongest man in the world, was looking at me with such a cold stare it would be very difficult if there was a misunderstanding with him. Mentioning that He Wanriang suffers from unrequited love for Flame, Baek Yusul replied that there is nothing between them and never was, so he shouldn't worry. Blushing, He Wanriang apologized and said goodbye to Baek Yusul, turning around and quickly leaving. It was a little confusing for him because in the original story, He Wanriang was cool and calm, but now he shows such unstable behavior. In the evening, Izel sat and tried to study some material, but she could not concentrate on it. She was troubled by the fact that during the practical exam, she asked Baek Yusul if he had really come up with the mixing method in a hurry. Then the guy thought about it and said that he had read a little bit in books, but basically he really came up with it on the spur of the moment. Izel always considered herself a genius and thought that if she kept trying, she would soon surpass her teacher. She believed in it, but now she doubts herself because at this rate, she will never be able to avenge her father. The disgusting and vile Adolobites had made her father a traitor and executed him, so she needed to become stronger as soon as possible, she thought. So patting herself on the cheeks, she said she couldn't leave it like that and she had to try harder, and then she practiced until late at night. Meanwhile, Flame was already in bed. She moved into the room because she likes the bustling life around her. As she lay there, she thought about Baek Yusol, because she thought he had no specific goal, which confirmed her guess that he had regressed. In the last part of the novel, the 11th month of the Silver Age told Ma Yusun that he could turn back time. However, the price will be the loss of memory, and after the mission is completed, he will disappear, and no one will even remember who saved the world. So the 11th moon asked him again if he would agree to it, because even his family would forget him, and Ma Yusun almost agreed. But Aizel stopped him by saying that rather than live in the world without him, she would rather meet the end remembering him. Her words proved to be convincing and Ma Yusun refused to regress, so in the epilogue the world was destroyed. If this world is really different from the novel's plot, and Baek Yusol used the power of the 11th month to regress. Therefore, after the mission is completed, he will disappear, and all traces of his activities and existence will be erased from this world. On the other hand, someone who has to lose most of his memory and is left with only one goal, to survive, said he just wants to survive. Suddenly, as if intending to interrupt Flame's thoughts, Jackie came running and said that Hei Wanriang had come to see her. Jackie told him that he was waiting on the first floor of the dormitory, to which Flame replied that she didn't care, and told him to say she was not there. Her friend wanted to make some arguments and persuade the girl to leave, but she didn't care and went to sleep on the other side. With no other choice, Jackie threw on her cloak and ran to Hei Wanriang, who was eagerly waiting for Flame. He didn't know the girl and asked who she was and where Flame was, to which Jackie said that Flame wasn't feeling well, so she went to bed early. Without even saying goodbye, the guy turned around and said he was leaving and thought that she was in a bad mood because she had denied Baek Yusol's feelings. Jackie stood further away because she was incredibly in love with Hei Wanriang, and he couldn't even remember her name. It was always Flame's high abilities and the attention of others that always went to Flame, and, most painfully for Jackie, Hei Wanriang's heart. The next day, the deputy director of the Stella Academy, 8th grade mage Aki Haden, appeared before Professor Myson Tiran. He said that she had been made a fool of by a student and that she should understand perfectly well that a lot is expected of her. Also asked whether the research on the method of convergence of random sequences was progressing well, and the professor replied that she would not disappoint him here. So the deputy thanked the professor and escorted her to the door, thinking that she did not realize that she was being used because her fame had blinded her. It's funny that a warrior of the world of magic who is supposed to fight demons, and she is conducting experiments for them, so Akihaden can't wait for her experiments to be over. Professor Myson Tiran, an assistant to Altalisi, was walking down the hallway, carrying a huge pile of paper in front of her, not seeing anything in front of her. Noticing this ridiculous picture, Baek Yusol came up with an offer to help and took most of the paper letters. After bringing the paper to the right place where there was a complete mess, Altalisi thanked him, because otherwise the professor would have yelled at her. When he noticed the formula, he was surprised, and Altalisi told him that Professor Myson was developing this formula in collaboration with other teachers. Baek Yusol mentioned that this is a technique of convergence of random sequences, and it became the first formula of magic, alchemy, and engineering. In the episode of Professor Mason's Blackening, demons help her complete the formula, and as a result, the difference in technique leads to terrible consequences. But with the appearance of Altalisi, everything changes quickly. What if she solves this problem before the dark people enter the plot? Baek Yusol thought. So he approached Altalisa, to which she, being the scared type, was expectedly frightened and offered him coffee. When she refused, he asked her if she was annoyed that Professor Myson was constantly bothering her, and she wondered why he was asking her that. After a short pause, Baek Yusol said that he could offer her an easy plan to repay the professor according to his merits. But she's just an assistant. How can she afford it? And if she gets fired, she'll have to live on the street, said Aliet Lisi. Then he offered the option of becoming an alchemist better than Professor Myson, so that no one would be able to despise her. Since Altalisa was already tired of being satisfied with dirty work in a dusty closet like Myson was pushing on her, she agreed. She dreams of becoming an alchemist and creating many inventions and has the talent to make her dream come true. So Altalisi will one day become the most brilliant alchemist of this generation and invent countless items and innovations. Of course, until now, reality has not allowed her to do so, so she had to put her dream on the back burner. But Baek Yusol will turn it into reality. After the first week of exams was over, Baek Yusol regularly visited Altalisi. They always spent their time actively and discode over new innovations together, which greatly lifted the girls' spirits. Baek Yu-sol was also pleased because her research and inventions are gaining momentum, but she still struggles with calculating formulas. So it will not be easy to bring the young genius to the right answer until Mycen Tyron finds the formula. While he was thinking, Flame noticed him walking down the hall and came over to tell him that he was going to bump into someone while he was thinking and called him old. She began to treat him with more scrutiny than before, which annoyed Baek Yu-sol, but he decided to ask her about her friend Jackie. Thinking that the guy wanted to meet her, she cringed and said that it was illegal, but Baek Yu-sol hadn't finished speaking yet and asked to hear the rest. Because if Jackie was under the influence of a demon, she would be extremely unstable. So he asked Flame to look after her. Not understanding the boy's strange request, she agreed to go hunting this weekend anyway, as the season had just opened. Baek Yu-sol already knew where they would go to the location where the 4th episode of Marteva's Cemetery would begin and where all the main characters would go. The battle will be great, and a 5th-ranked necromancer, Baek Yu-sol, will appear. He did not want to participate, but a secret reward will help him greatly with the familiars. So he went to the 2nd main tower, found instructor Lee Han-wol, and filled out an application for a hunting pass. After looking at Baek Yu-sol's application, Lee Han-wol realized that fencing or the honor code is difficult to learn at the academy. Ma Yusan's application for time off was on the table, so he decided to find out more just in case. He then said that many students took time off to go hunting, to which the professor agreed that they were going hunting to score more points. Just as Baek Yu-sol thought, even though Ma Yu-sung and Hae Won-ryong had high grades, they still persisted, but the teacher said that Ma Yu-sung actually asked to go home. Surprised by this, he realized that without Ma Yusun, they would not be able to deal with the necromancer. Not knowing what got into Ma Yusun because he would never leave without a good reason, but this team can't handle a 5th-level necromancer. And what should Baek Yu-sol do? Because without evidence, he will not be able to request support and he will not be able to pass on information because of narrative rights. So he has no other choice. He can't let them be destroyed, so he has to solve everything himself. A few days later, at the Marteva's Cemetery, the students were already destroying rather weak monsters with ease. One of them was sophomore Doc Chokwon, who destroyed a harbinger fish with a 2nd level of danger with a single blow. Later, a sophomore, Kasif Derek, came to him and started scolding him for disobeying an order, to which Doc only joked. Next to them stood Isil and sophomore Ban Dian, who said that Kasif's actions were useless because Doc was always so hot-tempered. Ban turned to Isil and told her that she didn't have to worry about them, but she was embarrassed and silent. Looking at them, Isil thought that she went with them only because there was a vacancy in their club and they seemed to be good people. He was about to leave when a burst of light and noise from strong magical spells appeared behind Isil. When they asked what the noise was, they realized that someone had enthusiastically joined the battle not far from them. So they decided to go at least to say hello, because it would not be good if their hunting zones overlapped with someone else's. Hong Byong and Flame were standing opposite each other, clearly looking at each other with unfriendly intentions. Isil watched the whole situation and wondered what was going on. Upon a cursory inspection of the neighborhood, a large harbinger fish was lying on the ground, as it was a 3rd-level fish that was very difficult to find. They were probably arguing about who would get the most points, and if you interfere, there will be a lot of problems. Besides, Izel has no desire to cross paths with the younger sister of the enemy who killed her father. Before she could think that the best solution was to leave as soon as possible, the leader of her group, Kasif, decided to reconcile the girls. Believing that he was older than them and had authority among the younger ones, he approached and asked them to explain the situation, to which the girls rudely pushed him away at the same time. This made him angry, and he asked for more respect, to which Hong Byong said that if he was older, he should behave accordingly. Their heated argument was abruptly interrupted by some unknown pressure and a strange sensation that gripped their bodies, as dozens of pure white hand remains began to pierce the ground and reach out into the world. It was the strongest and most terrifying magic of the earth, necromancy. At this time, Baek Yu-sol was destroying monsters and thinking that he also wanted to use magic. Why the flicker of all things? He knew something about this event and its weaknesses, so he moved in a certain direction to find what he needed. He didn't have the strong skills and incredible power to simply destroy an army of skeletons like Ma Yu-sung. So Baek Yu-sol has only one option for survival, to act as only players can. He approached the grave of the general who commanded hundreds of skeletons, and he immediately began to crawl out of his resting place. There are only 3 such half-boss generals in this episode, and with the guy's current level of ability, it's just not possible for him to fight him as usual. Watching the monster crawl out or transform is a cliché, but this waste of time does not bring you any closer to victory. So without hesitation, He defeated the general with a single blow and turned his head into a staff with which to control the skeletons. Since Baek Yu-sol can now control the skeleton army, you can join the group and complete the episode. While Baek Yu-sol was dealing with the skeleton general, a group of students were surrounded by 100 skeletons, which they could barely handle. Flame had forgotten that she was going to be a necromancer in this episode, but something was wrong. She looked at Isol, but Ma Yusun wasn't there. So they somehow need to counter the 5th level necromancer with such a team, so Hee Wonryeon has already requested the support of the academy, which will arrive in 3 hours. Professor Stella will help them if they hold out for a while, and even if they can't fight the necromancer, they will be able to escape. Hongbyeon said there was no time to talk because it was a cemetery, and the longer they waited, the more skeletons would appear. So they had to retreat to the camp, but Jackie could not cope with the onslaught of skeletons and could no longer defend herself. And when the skeletons had almost reached her, Isol suddenly shattered the skeleton with a strong ice attack. Isol quickly realized that it was a necromancer and that he had prepared himself thoroughly, and she thought it was highly likely that he had used the mana vessel technique. With the mana vessel technique, the necromancer is able to inject and store his mana. Necromancers have their own mana limits, and if they just summoned monsters, they would run out of mana after 10 skeletons. And since it was almost impossible to take over such a large territory, it was all planned a long time ago. So the group guessed that it was a necromancer's plan to turn them into skeleton mages and replenish his army with powerful warriors. Kasif decided that since he was in charge, he needed to use strong magic to end everything. But his plan was destroyed by a skeleton that grabbed his leg. Doc Chulkwan noticed that his friend was in danger and immediately rushed to him and quickly managed to fight off the skeleton. However, it was too late and Kasif did not have time to finish the spell, so they were hit by a strong magical bounce. Yes, the situation was not the best, and then there is the magical bounce that can cover everyone with its explosion, so you need to withstand it. Most of the students could no longer fight and were falling down from exhaustion. Flame was also on her last legs. Flame's mana was almost gone and her skeletons were running out. She had no way out. The skeleton had already come too close and was about to destroy the girl, but before it could touch her, it stopped abruptly. Absolutely all the skeletons stopped and froze, and behind the crowd of skeletons stood someone with a familiar face. It was Baek Yu-sol, holding a rod with a general's head on the end, but how could he defeat him, Flame thought. The general is much stronger and more powerful than ordinary skeletons and is guarded by the elite, and Baek Yu-sol was able to defeat him alone. Thanks to him, everyone was saved from certain death, and the sophomores thanked him for his bravery. But Isol was curious how he got the general's head, and he joked that he just pulled it out of a pile of bones. So you need to come up with a plan of action quickly, because when the necromancer realizes that he cannot use the generals, he will begin to control the skeletons directly. Then the sophomores asked him if he had a plan, and he said that on the way here he had seen a necromancer near the camp, so they would not be able to escape the encirclement. Therefore, they have only one option, to destroy the necromancer, because although they have strong magic, they are physically almost nothing. The students objected that he was surrounded by many skeletons, but Baek Yu-sol was sure that the mage was already exhausted, and if he didn't attack now, they would never escape. At the moment, the necromancer's guard includes 1 general, 6 elite skeletons, and 50 ordinary ones, and the more time passes, the more of them there will be. But how to convince others of this? But then Hongbyeon and Flame helped him by agreeing to his plan, especially since the necromancer doesn't expect an attack now. The sophomores looked at each other and realized that there was no other way out, so they had to attack the necromancer now. At this time, the 5th-ranked necromancer of the Dark Tower, Sabaik, was near the camp and was looking forward to the students' defeat. He reflected on how lucky he was to have met Stella's students, and when they became part of his army, the Demon Alliance would finally be equal to him. After collecting about 7 years of mana in mana vessels, he was able to reach an army of 700 skeletons, and now no one will mock him. However, something that caught his attention abruptly, one of the generals was destroyed by someone, which greatly confused the necromancer. Not only threatened Sabayek's plans, but he looked around and noticed a giant ice arrow flying at him with great speed. Having managed to react to the attack by blocking it with a wall of bones created by a 4th-ranked magic, he noticed that it had cracked. But the students didn't waste a minute, so a giant fireball flew at the necromancer, burning everything in its path. Although he was able to fight back again, he let his guard down, never thinking that the students were attacking him. They were still the Stella Academy, so one shouldn't underestimate them, the necromancer thought, and began to prepare for the defense. Initially, the necromancer did not plan to use this, but it would be dangerous to confront in a direct fight, so it is worth calling elite warriors. He quickly began to cast a spell, and within seconds a strong army of skeletons gathered around him. Having overdone it a bit with the skeleton summoning spell, his organs were injured, but that should be enough, the necromancer thought. And just when he thought he could relax, Baek Yusol jumped behind him using the flicker. He was very surprised that Baek Yusol had appeared so quickly, because he had been keeping a close eye on all the students through the skeleton's eyes. In addition, the boy had the head of one of the necromancer's generals on his head, but Baek Yusol did not hesitate to throw it to the ground and break it. This act caused a lot of damage to the necromancer, and so in Baek Yusol, he saw the underestimated power of Stella's academy. Meanwhile, the guy realized that everything was not going according to plan because the sophomores were supposed to deal with the generals and come to his aid. But because of the additional elite warriors, they are not finished yet and he will have to fight alone as the weakest of the group. Looking at the necromancer again, he realized that he had overdone his summoning and had suffered internal injuries, so Baek Yusol had a chance. Hong Byong, fighting off the skeletons, knew how to destroy them as quickly as possible and unite with Baek Yusol, but she was distracted. Arshuan reported that Baek Yusol was left alone with the necromancer. Knowing that it would be an unequal fight because the difference in ranks was high, she could not leave the fight. Meanwhile, in Baek Yusol, a prison of pure white bones rose out of the ground, almost fraudulently created in just a second. The only way to deal with it is to react as quickly as possible and get out, so the guy quickly took advantage of the flicker and jumped back. Jumping again as close as possible to the necromancer, Baek Yusol was about to attack when the latter immediately defended himself with a wall of bones. However, Baek Yusol foresaw this and brought a lot of cola potions that dissolve bones very effectively, thus destroying Sa Bahek's barrier. The necromancer was enraged by this and called the boy a miserable rat and attacked him with a spell of bone spears. Baek Yusol wanted to take advantage of the enemy's irritation and jumped behind him to deliver the decisive blow. At that moment, Sa Bahek turned his head to him and smiled, because he had hidden one of the spears in the ground behind him, which managed to wound the boy in the shoulder. The necromancer, rejoicing that he had managed to catch Baek Yusol, praised himself and told him that he had wounded him badly and that he would make a good warrior in his army. Now Baek Yusol realized that although the necromancer is weak, he is of the 5th rank, but although he is a high-ranked enemy, he is still weak. One more jump and he's defeated, but he can't use his mind because of the pain, so he can't stop the flicker, so he needs to increase the distance. So, taking advantage of the necromancer's arrogance, he began to crawl a little further like a rat to make his plan work. The distance between them was 15 meters. In other words, at this distance, Baek Yusol would not have to use the flicker interrupt. Seeing the glimmer of hope, Baek Yusol moved with the help of flicker, and in a split second he was standing in front of the necromancer and immediately struck the final blow. Immediately, the skeletons began to crumble, and almost nothing remained but a cloud of ash floating somewhere in the air. The students were happy because Baek Yusol was able to cope and destroy the necromancer on his own, and were glad that they were able to escape and survive. Meanwhile, Baek Yusol, hearing fragments of his friend's phrases, fell over the necromancer's body and lost consciousness from his wounds and fatigue. After the incident, the magical knights accompanied the students from the scene of the incident to Stella Academy itself. Lee Han-wool, who had just returned, made a comment to Baek Yusol because he had promised to train in a place with clean air, but he didn't think it would be a cemetery. Baek Yusol apologized, but still, according to the academy, he will be deducted points because there are no exceptions. However, the very fact that he went to save his comrades without thinking about breaking the rules is remarkable, and Baek Yusol deserves a reward and points for that. So the professor turned and left, and Baek Yusol remembered that he had been told that his legs needed a few days to recover, so he needed to rest. At that moment, Izel came up to him and thanked him for today, and Baek Yusol asked her to take him out to dinner sometime. As he was about to leave, Izel interrupted him and asked if she could do the same if she tried, or if she would reach the same heights as him. It was a bad idea on the part of the guy, because in the original she didn't ask such questions. Because he interfered, Izel merely faced a challenge and was unable to overcome it. After thinking about it, he replied that she didn't need to ask him about it. She had already achieved remarkable results that others considered unattainable. Confused, the girl asked him how he knew this, and he replied briefly and clearly that he had been watching her. The girl blushed, and Baek Yusol realized what he had said and quickly left Izel because it sounded like he was some kind of perverted stalker. However, Izel was happy about it because no one is interested in the life of a trader's daughter, and he said that he was watching her, so these words warmed her heart. The next day, all those involved in the incident were gathered to be rewarded, and Baek Yusol was surprised that many nobles and high-ranking mages came. But anyway, he looked at Hong Byong, who was beaming with joy when she noticed that Baek Yusol was looking at her, and she was a little embarrassed. In the end, Lee Han-wol came to the podium and said that today, 12 students who fought with a representative of the Dark People would be awarded. These awards will be handed out by the principal himself at this moment, at which point he rose to the podium and looked at all the brave students. Baek Yusol saw Eltman Eltvin for the first time, so he was very surprised that he would personally award the guy. He remembered that he was 300 years old and always wore a pleasant smile, and yet he was the most powerful warrior of magic with the title of fighter. Eltman approached each student in turn and rewarded them with sincere words of support and wishes for the future. It was Baek Yusol's turn, so the director approached him, and the boy became very nervous but did not show it. He could feel his gaze on him, pressing him hard. That's what a 9th-ranked mage is like, the boy thought. The director smiled sincerely and said that Baek Yusol was as diligent as ever, but the boy did not understand what he meant, and so the ceremony ended. So, as a reward, Baek Yusol received 5 million credits, and now he doesn't have to worry about money for a while. He was also given vessels of mana that can be counted as a reward for destroying the necromancer, which can be counted as his heart. It's still not easy for Baek Yusol, but soon Altalisi will develop a subspace, and then it will be easier for him to carry things around. Now, it was time for rewards from the system, and it again gave him a choice and decided that now the most important thing was to convert everything into experience. He realized how weak he was in this battle, because even careful training is useless, so he should use his knowledge to advance further. The experience conversion he chose improved the flicker skill and opened the possibility of using it up to 3 times continuously. Meanwhile, Isol was in a meditation class on the journey into the abyss, where she diligently followed the professor's instructions. But Isol accidentally fell asleep and the professor flew up in the form of a butterfly and told her that magic was forbidden during meditation. She looked up and couldn't believe her eyes. She had accidentally created an ice boulder above her, even though she hadn't used the technique. She glanced at the other students, but they didn't notice anything. Even though it was first-rank magic, they should have felt the flow of mana anyway. Then Isol thought that if this was really the effect of meditation, it meant that Baek Yusolu had predicted everything. After the meditation lesson, thanks to the reward, she could now enjoy a bun with red bean paste, so she was very happy about it. Having only had 1 bite of the bun, she was distracted by Prince Jeremy, who took an interest in her and asked her if she had joined any clubs. She wasn't really interested in any clubs, so she wasn't in any clubs, and the prince offered her a place in his club. Isol asked what the conditions were, and Jeremy said that there were no conditions. He just liked her so much that he wanted her in his ranks. However, Isol kept quiet because she knew it was a lie, and he just wanted to get her and turn her into his trophy. Thinking that the girl didn't believe him, he leaned over to her and said that there were really no conditions, only that she join his group and stay close to him. It was hard to say no to him because she understood who he was. The kingdom of Adlibit was at war with him and his empire, so under his influence her life would be improved. She will no longer have to enjoy a bun, nor will she have to endure the humiliation of being the daughter of a traitor, but she knows it's not worth it. The moment Isel opened her mouth to say something, her eyes were empty, and she felt a blow to her cheek that did not immediately begin to hurt. It was Flame who started yelling at Isley for flirting with men again, even after Flame confessed her feelings. However, before Isel could speak, Flame grabbed her wrist and forced her to go away to talk to her. As Flame ran away, she said that Isel should thank her because if she had refused Jeremy for no reason, he would have forced himself on her anyway. Still, after apologizing for the slap, Flame turned and left, leaving Azel, who had absolutely no idea what was going on. Flame wondered if she had done the right thing, because if Isel had joined Jeremy's circle, Jeremy's novel would have crushed her spirit. She didn't want to disrupt the story, but looking at Baek Yusol's actions, she thought she had done the right thing, and she was worried that Jeremy hadn't realized she was making it up. Jeremy himself was sitting in his apartment drinking tea, thinking about Flame and how interesting she was to him. Of course, he realized that everything she said to get Isel out of his clutches was a pure lie, and he thought it was even cute. So she's more interesting than Isel, so Jeremy promised that he would get Flame at any cost. In a few days, a very important exam was to begin, so Lee Hanwol gathered the students there and told them what the task was. Unlike before, when students had only encountered monsters of the first and second level of danger, the target of this battle was monsters of the third level. This is a strategy task, so by dividing into teams, you need to analyze all the information about the monster and tactically destroy it. Therefore, since it is necessary to defeat a medium-level monster, students will be given 4 days to prepare. Having information about the monsters, you need to choose the most suitable one for your team. This time, S and A classes will be combined. So Lee Hanwol asked to form teams of up to 6 people and hand in the lists, at which point Isel stood there thinking that she hated group activities. No one came up to her to recruit her to the team opposite Hong Byon, who was surrounded by many students who asked to join them. Her circle was once so large too before the Adolobites destroyed her family, although they were once equal. The Great Duchy of Mulf with the ice element, and the Kingdom of Adolabit with the fire element at that time, these two families held each other back, dividing the world of magic into two. Then two geniuses were born, Han Bion and Izel, and she thought she was chosen, but in her current state she is not sure she can resist the Adolbites. Unexpectedly, someone came up to her. It was Beck Yusol, who immediately asked if she was alone, and she shyly said yes. Then, with a sincere smile and a pleasant tone, he invited Izel to form a team with him. Although Hong Byong was surrounded by many students, she noticed that Beck Yusol came up and invited Izel to join the team. There are no restrictions on the minimum number of participants, so Beck Yusol offered to create a team of the two of them and even get a bonus, which surprised the girl. It would be difficult to defeat the third-level monster by himself, so Beck Yusol asked her again with a smile if she agreed to do it. After pausing and thinking, she agreed, because she had no one to cooperate with anyway, so Beck Yusol went to hand in the list. At this point, Hong Bion quickly approached Izel and stood in front of her with obviously unfriendly intentions. Izel asked what she wanted and told her to behave if a pig like her was lucky. The princess immediately turned around and walked in the other direction so as not to see Izel, who had just been humiliated for almost nothing. Despite the fact that it was very unpleasant for Izel to hear this about herself, she realized that it was not about her abilities but about Beck Yusol. Meanwhile, Hong Byong thought that she would never lose to a loser and a commoner. Even a team of her sticking points would be enough. However, it is most advantageous to attract a knight who is considered the best of the best, so the princess approached Ma Yusun. Ma Yusun approached him and greeted her in his usual manner, but Hong Byong immediately asked if he had a team, and he replied that he wanted to be alone. Then she proposed to form a team, which Ma Yusun refused, but she had an argument that Bayek Yusol and Isil would be together. The princess didn't think they would go for a medium-level monster rather than a medium-large special monster. So she asked him again if he agreed, and Ma Yusun smiled and said yes, because he had wanted to compete with Baek Yusol for a long time. Well, having agreed with Ma Yusun, the princess looked at her rivals and thought that this time she would surpass them. 4 days later, Professor Lee Havel gathered the students in the test hall and announced the start of the practical exam for A and S classes. Flame stood aside and waited for her turn. At first, she thought she would defeat the monster with the opposite attribute, but to get more points, she decided to be alone. On average, it takes 5 first-class mages to defeat an average monster, and if you add attribute compatibility, you can handle a higher-level monster. However, Flame is a mage of the attribute of light, and this attribute does not combine with the others, so she decided to take the exam herself. Flame hoped that Iseli would be okay, because in the novel, she failed to form a team and received the lowest grade. She even wanted to invite Isil to her place, but if Beck Yusol is with her, everything will turn out as well as possible. The 16th group finished the test, so it was the turn of the 17th group, which had only one flame. So, when she heard that it was time to go, she moved from her seat and walked past Beck Yusol and Isil without even looking in their direction. However, Flame forgot to tie her shoelaces and stumbled and began to fall when Beck Yusol ran up behind her and managed to save her from the inevitable fall. After thanking Beck Yusol, she hurried up and realized that Jackie always tied her shoes, and it would be difficult for her if she went out on the field alone. So, when the students went to the battlefield, they were surprised that such a fragile girl like her could destroy the monster on her own. Opposite her stood a large boar, and it did not have my attributes, so there was no point in hitting it with the opposite. No one waited, and the exam began, so an incredibly large bear carcass was chasing the poor girl. No one believed her, but without hesitation, Flame began to use the spell Flowers Swaying in the Wind. This spell was able to stop the giant monster and gave Flame time to prepare an already attacking spell. So as soon as the boar got out of the trap, he immediately rushed to Flame, but he didn't have time to get to Flame because she attacked him and destroyed him. The body of the giant bear fell with a roar right in front of Flame's feet, which meant that she had passed the test. All the students were shocked by this because some of them, even as a group of 5, could not defeat the mid-level monster. On her way to the stands, she heard that the next group would be the 31st and was very surprised that it was Ma Yusun and Hong Byong. Standing aside, Flame wondered why Hong Byong was with Ma Yusun, since the two never met in the novel. As expected from a princess, she chose a rather rare monster of medium danger level, the Fishman. Hong Byong and Ma Yusun's attributes are fire, earth, and lightning, and the Fishman is a monster of the water element, so he is the exact opposite of their attributes. After assessing the situation, Flame realized that if they defeated such a monster in 2, giving up the natural advantage, they would get maximum marks. It was time to start the battle, and the monster immediately screamed a terrible scream and was about to attack and took off. But Hong Biyong and Ma Yusong were in no hurry to attack the monster, and everyone was surprised to see the swordsman standing behind the magician. However, Ma Yusong jumped up using a power jump and left only a cloud of dust on the floor that was no longer under him. The sophomores were surprised by the power jump, but he won't be able to get to the fishman because a power jump can only be done from the surface. So Ma Yusong used the magic of the earth to raise a small platform for himself, and Hong Biyong used a punch to give momentum to this platform. Ma Yusong used his giant kick technique to easily bring the flying monster to the ground. Then, using the magic of the earth, he raised large stone slabs from the ground and blocked the fishman in them. This was not enough and the monster was able to get out, but it was too late because the princess had finished preparing a powerful spell. Thinking that this was not enough for the monster, although it was already clear that he was not happy about the princess's attack, as Ma Yusong attacked him with lightning. After such strong attacks, the monster quickly burned to ashes and only a handful of ash remained. Although all the students were delighted with them, Hong Biyong was looking for Baek Yusol's recognition and thought he would not surpass her result. Baek Yusol himself had already entered the battlefield with Isol and asked to summon 5 monsters. Absolutely all the students were surprised by this, because 5 students could not defeat even 1 monster, and here there were 5 at once. The 5 monsters summoned were a Hymerodon frog, a sand grizzly black bull, a falcon, a Kylan slime nami, and a super-sensitive bat. Hong Biyong asked if Ma Yusin understood anything, but he was just curious about Baek Yusol's plans. Lee Hanwol asked who had made the monster selection, and Baek Yusol replied without hesitation that it was him. So the professor said that since Baek Yusol was a knight, he would be able to get points even in such an extreme situation and thought that such a strategy was impossible for the bishop. Baek Yusol disagreed and argued that this strategy was designed specifically for the bishop. Although these words surprised the professor, he understood what the boy meant and asked them to start a fight. The guy asked if Izel was ready, and she said that she had been for a long time, so Baek Yusol asked her to trust him. At that moment, the girl remembered their dialogue during another night training session. Izel wondered why he chose her, because with his abilities he could have hired anyone with better talent. Although no one can match the power of Hong Biyong's flame control spells, and Ma Yuson is generally the strongest of the freshmen. All of them would have been suitable for Baek Yusol, but he decided that it was better to form a team with Isol, and that was that. To be honest, Izel still didn't understand what Baek Yusol had in mind, but there must be a reason why he chose her, and in that case she would justify his choice. So, motivated, Izel began to concentrate on using a strong, high-ranking spell. The students realized that this is an etheric resonance, a phenomenon that manifests itself only when a magician of the 6th rank or higher fully enters his consciousness. At the moment of their maximum concentration, a countercurrent phenomenon can occur, releasing all their mana. Baek Yusol looked at her and thought that she really deserved the title of Queen of Winter, and it was time to start planning a battle for 2 against 5 monsters. So, without hesitation, the boy immediately used the flicker and got as close to the Hymerodon frog as possible. Thus, after taking the Hymerodon out of the fight for a while, the next one was a sand-grizzled black bull that was standing nearby. But the bull was not going to attack Baek Yusol. For some reason, he was more interested in the Hymerodon, so he stood and looked at the frog's horn, which was red from the blow. Everything is going according to Baek Yusol's plan, because the method of fighting the 5 monsters is to create a situation where they destroy each other. To pit your enemies against each other is called the strategy of the borrowed knife, when you don't need to waste your own strength but take someone else's knife. Once upon a time, the veterans of the game thought about how to defeat many monsters in a small group, and after many attempts found a way to use the monster's features against them. First, you need to attack the Highlander, after which its horn will turn red, which will cause instinctive aggression in the black bull. An excited black bull will release sand from its body, scattering it everywhere, and when this sand falls on the slime nami, it will start creating a lot of water to keep it from drying out. Then the Kaidan falcon, sensing moisture, will begin to scream loudly at the level of the 7th octave, if not higher. And finally, it will provoke the hypersensitive bat with its sensitive hearing, after which it will attack the Kaidan. The teachers were surprised that the monsters didn't get along, and praised the boy for understanding the characteristics of the monsters he chose. But what really impressed them was Izel's concentration, because even in the midst of this chaos, she was focused and her mana was stable. It is immediately apparent that Izel sincerely trusts herself and her protection to her knight Baek Yusol, who has been tirelessly defending her from the chaotic attacks of the monsters. Looking at Baek Yusol, Ma Yuson asked Princess Hong Biyong if she thought Baek Yusol looked like the perfect knight to protect his princess. Finally, Isel opened her blue eyes and grabbed her stick. Then the water on the ground froze, and a giant flower grew high in the sky. But eventually the ice would be broken, and all their attention would be focused on Isel because she had just made a high-profile attack. However, before that happened, the shiny and beautiful flower shattered into pieces, turning into a sharp weapon that fell in all directions. This did not help to destroy the monsters, and so all the professors thought that although the team failed, they would already have high marks for this attempt. When they were about to make this decision, Isel pulled the opposite one into the air, and the cluster of blue light that served as the petals of the crystal flower still remained. Everyone thought it was part of an ice flower that blossomed with the ice and turned into leaves, but her specialty was magic that combined ice and lightning at the same time. Her magic was close to art. It was a destructive art aimed at destroying enemies whose beauty was admired by everyone. Before, she didn't believe she could use the two attributes, but Baek Yu-sol said he believed in her and let her believe in his belief in her. Until now, she had nothing, no faith in her purpose, and no one to support her and recognize her path. But everything has changed, and now she has her own light that illuminates the road in front of her, so she doesn't have to wander in the dark. So the assessment of the 32nd team's abilities was over, and Isel stood in the arena with a sweet smile on her face. The next day, the results were tallied and posted for review, and Ma Yusong and Hong Biyong confirmed that they had taken second place. So the princess accepted defeat, even after they defeated a mid-level monster that even had the opposite attribute. Then the princess thought, what if her knight was Baek Yu-sol? Maybe then she could also show such strong magic. If there is a perfect knight in this world, it would be logical for him to serve Hong Biyong, the one who will become the perfect queen, the princess thought. She would probably be lying to herself if she said that she had accepted it, so she decided to find out more about Baek Yu-sol. When she decided to leave, she noticed Sayorn Orkin, so the princess quickly passed because she thought that she had come to gloat over her defeat of such a team. Sayorn looked at the girl's back and said that she hadn't learned anything. At this time, Flame was sitting in the library writing something, but she was worried that Isel had mastered the crystal flower so early. This spell became her signature one as soon as she believed in herself in the future after she had passed all the tests. In the original, Isel was about to fall, but she showed a crystal flower, probably thanks to Baek Yu-sol. In the original plot of Ma's novel, Yu-sun and Isel confess their feelings to each other while the world around them is collapsing. But what if there's another storyline that Flame doesn't know about where the side character Baek Yu-sol loves Isel and the moment of disaster wanted to regress instead of Ma Yu-sun? This regression allows you to create a world in which his beloved survived even if she does not remember for him whether Baek Yu-sol will be satisfied with the result. Love was so fueled that he decided to turn back time at the cost of his existence in the world. I wonder how Flame thought about it. Since Baek Yu-sol completed the 5th episode, he could have benefited from an additional reward from the system. The guy realized that he had already strengthened his skills enough, so it was better to prepare for the next episode. So he did not hesitate to request an item called the Key of Ephaniel, and the system thought about it, but gave him the item. Although this item is not of the level of an ancient relic, it is still a very rare item available only to the strongest players. This key gives access to the place where the deities exist, but to use it, you need to leave the academy. But after the incident with the necromancer, it became difficult to get time off, so I need to join a club to get permission to leave the academy. The next day, at one of the lectures, Baek Yu-sol successfully wrote an essay and decided to go look for a club for himself. He stood and looked at the bulletin board, choosing a club that would suit him, because not everyone is given permission to leave the academy, so you need to think carefully. Isel was standing next to Baek Yu-sol, so he asked her if she hadn't joined a club yet, and she replied that it was strange. He was sure that many clubs would like to have her, but she didn't think so because of her status. After the practical exam, people's opinions of Isel have changed a lot and she should understand this better than anyone else, but she still needs to choose carefully. Suddenly, as if on purpose, Ma Yu-sun crept up on them as quietly as possible and put his hand on Baek Yu-sol's shoulder and greeted them. He liked their performance at the exam and also heard that the recent battle with the necromancer was led by Baek Yu-sol, which made him admire him. Leaning closer and looking at him with a look that pierced to the core of his soul, Ma Yu-sun said that he knew that Baek Yu-sol thought differently from others. Baek Yu-sol did not hesitate to say that he was a commoner, so he had to try harder than others, to which Ma Yu-sun replied that he was having a better time than him. I had to ask Ma Yu-sun what he does on weekends, and he replied that he prepares his homework, which surprised not only Baek Yu-sol, but also Isel. Ma Yu-sun is also studying and training, but he doesn't look like a nerd, Baek Yu-sol pointed out, to which he replied that he had only recently started doing all this. But he was supposed to start working hard later. What was the reason? Baek Yu-sol thought. And then Isel realized that it was the practice. Ma Yu-sun agreed, because if it wasn't for Isel, who for some reason called her lady, which made her angry that she didn't show up. He would have lost to Hei Wanryong. In the original plot, Ma Yusong and Flame were supposed to easily defeat Hei Wanryong. However, due to the Baek Yusul, Flame was delayed and had to face an opponent himself, so it turns out he also changed early. It was for the best at this rate. They will try harder, and unlike Bakusol, their progress has a positive impact on the happy ending. Realizing that Baek Yusul had not yet joined any club, Ma Yuson invited him to his club, but he said that he would think about it if he was satisfied with the conditions. So, as expected, Ma Yuson asked him what conditions he wanted, and Baek Yusul began to list a bunch of conditions, the main one being permission to be active outside the academy. Aizel was surprised by such demands, but the hero understood this and just joked. Ma Yusun accepted these words and offered to create such a group for him, even with a condition for special outings. Baek Yusul asked what the benefit was for Ma Yusun, and he replied that it was simple, because Baek Yusul was special. The guy just mentioned that one of Ma Yusun's main problems was his loneliness, so he decided to agree to it, and he was so excited. Also, Baek Yusul decided to bring Aizel with him because in the original they were inseparable, so now she can fix Ma Yusun's psyche. Baek Yusul had an idea, so they filled out a club registration form and called their group the Tasty Places Club, and their goal was to research restaurants. Aizel asked if this would work, because to get a seal that allows the activity, you need a teacher leader to blow and at least 4 of them. For Ma Yusun, this was not a problem because he would deal with the participants and seals, but the teacher would be a challenge. This surprised Baek Yusul, because Ma Yusun can even get special permission to take time off, to which he replied that they are just garbage. So Ma Yusun went to get the seal, and Baek Yusul thought that not everyone can give a seal for a special activity, so it must be someone at the top of the academy. The first main tower, Stella, the academy's deputy director, was sitting in her office when the door opened and someone quickly entered. The deputy director was very surprised to see Ma Yusong, and he said that he hadn't seen his grandfather for a long time.